Hey guys, tonight we slip into the quiet shadows of a world most people never imagine when they think of history. Not knights or kings, not grand battles or epic romances. No, tonight, we follow someone whose name was never written down, whose hands fed the whole village, and yet whose story was rarely told. You probably never thought about how cold a stone floor feels before sunrise, or how a wooden peel feels like an extension of your own arm after 20 years. But once you see it, this sleepy, flower-dusted corner of the past, you can't unsee it. There's something almost sacred in the repetition, in the stubborn rhythm of someone who always rises first, who always feeds the fire, who always goes unnoticed, and you probably wouldn't survive it just saying. So, before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. I'd love to know where you're listening from and what time it is where you are. So leave a little breadcrumb in the comments. Now, dim the lights. Maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum. And let's ease into tonight's journey together. You wake up before the stars have had time to leave the sky, and for a moment, it's unclear if you're still dreaming or already behind schedule. The cold reaches up from the floor like it has fingers. You grope for your tunic in the dark, one arm into the sleeve, and stub your toe on the same stool you've been stubbing your toe on for 15 years. There's no sense in lighting a candle, your hands know the way. You wrap your shawl tighter and shuffle toward the oven like it might run away if you're not quick. It's still sleeping, just ash and last night's sighs. The coals whisper, not quite dead, but nowhere near useful. You feed them slowly, carefully, like a child who needs coaxing into wakefulness. The bellows wheeze. The fire answers with a reluctant groan. Warmth, eventually, creeps in like gossip. The air is quiet, except for your joints. Knees and knuckles sound like old doors. Outside, nothing moves except a goat snoring somewhere down the lane. You love this part. You think though love might not be the right word. It's more like surrender. There's a strange peace in being the only one awake while the whole world dreams. Of course, your dreams are mostly about burnt crust and spoiled yeast. But still, as you prod the fire, you take note of the subtle scent of old bread still lingering in the cracks of the oven. It's a kind of perfume only bakers know, charred hope and brown edges. The stones beneath your feet are chipped and uneven, worn smooth in places by 1,000 sleepy footsteps. You think of them as a map your feet have memorized. Step here. Avoid that crack. The splinter near the back wall, don't press your heel. This building knows your rhythm better than your own family does. You remember when your daughter stepped in barefoot once, shrieked, and swore she'd never be a baker. That was 5 winters ago. She still hasn't changed her mind. You press your ear to the oven wall. Yes, that's heat. Finally. Not just promise. You add more wood, but not too much. Too hot, and the bread sings in protest. Splits open too fast. Too cool, and the dough rises in sulky defiance. The oven is not a machine, it's more like a friend with moods. Historians still argue whether these early stone ovens were designed with any kind of airflow science, or if the builders just guessed and got lucky. You suspect the latter. Every baker you've met has their own secret way of interpreting the oven's grumbles. One swears by tapping the bricks, another spits on a spoon and waits to see if it hisses. You just trust your elbow. If it's too hot to hold close for 5 seconds, it's ready. You turn to the sack of flour less than you hoped. Again. You lift it, testing the weight, muttering under your breath. This is the part no one writes poems about: the constant calculation, the daily gamble of stretching what you have without sacrificing taste or texture. The flour itself is dusty and coarse. The miller down the road insists it's the best grind in the Shire, but you have your doubts. Sometimes it smells faintly of damp wood, and you've pulled pebbles out more than once. People say millers have sneaky hands, always shaving just a little off the top. There's even an old joke that millers go to confession backwards so they can keep their secrets. Whether that's true or not, you've stopped bothering to argue. You just sift with your fingers and hope for no surprises. You reach for the bucket, water sloshes, cold enough to bite. Your wrist aches as you mix the slurry into the flour. Then salt. Then the blessedly familiar weight of your hands pressing into dough. It's the one moment you don't feel ancient. Something about kneading pulls you into your body, makes you part of something simple and alive. The dough resists at first, stubborn and shaggy, but you know it. You coax it into surrender. It's a quiet battle that ends in a soft, springy ball that somehow smells like home. As the sky lightens ever so slightly, still more navy than blue, you shape the first rounds. Some are long, like little boats. Others are fat and squat, easier to carry. Each has its customer, its story. Old Magda likes hers thin with burnt edges. The innkeeper wants loaves that stack neatly. You don't write names. You remember by shape, by scent, by need, and while your hands move, your mind wanders. You think about that story the blacksmith told last week about a bakery in York where the baker built an oven so big he could sleep inside it. Nonsense, probably, but still, what luxury to be so warm. You think about the morning your own roof leaked and dripped straight into the proving bowl. That dough never rose, just sat there, sulking like a cat in the rain. You baked it anyway. Someone bought it, said it tasted like disappointment. They weren't wrong. The oven yawns wider now, glowing like a mouth that's just remembered its hunger. You grab the peel, long and cracked, and slide in the first loaf with a practiced twist of your wrist. The oven hums. You hum back. Somewhere down the lane, a rooster makes a sound like it regrets everything. You agree. And then, from nowhere, the memory of that time the dog stole a whole tray and ate half before you caught him. You'd cried. You don't even like dogs. But that morning, something in you broke. Not because of the bread, because you were so tired. Because no one else wakes this early. Because you wanted someone to see, but the dog just wagged his tail. And you scolded yourself for crying over yeast and teeth. Another log to the fire. Another crease in your palm. Another quiet minute before the rest of the world remembers its morning. You look out the window. The stars are almost gone. The church bell will ring soon. But for now, it's just you and the warmth you built from nothing. The fire speaks louder now, crackling with purpose, and the scent of warm dough mingles with smoke in the small, low-ceiling bakery that never fully wakes, even when you do. You wipe your hands on the same cloth you've used all week, stiff with flour and oil, and something you've long stopped identifying, and check the first loaf. The crust has begun to split just slightly, a good sign if not too soon. You tap the side of the oven like a priest knocking on a tomb, then reach for the next round of dough waiting on the wooden board, its surface dusted with yesterday's ghosts. You shape each one with hands that no longer feel the cold, only the memory of it, and in the rhythm of press, fold, roll, there's a strange lullaby of motion that rocks your thoughts into places they usually don't go. You think about your own father, who once told you a baker's day is stolen from both ends of time too early to be with the living, too late to sleep with the dead. He thought it was funny. You think it's a bit too accurate. A knock on the shutter startles the silence. Not a customer too early. Not the priest he never knocks. You unlatch the wooden slat and find nothing but a scrap of parchment tied to a stone, scribbled with something about flour quotas and a delivery you don't remember agreeing to. Classic tax clerk behavior. You sigh, ball the paper, and toss it into the fire. It flares for half a second, then disappears, like so many of your protests. You move back to the loaves, now beginning their final rise, a little proud, a little lopsided, as if they too have been up since the stars. Your feet are dusted white, your fingernails lined with dough, and there's flour in places flour should never be. You swear it gets behind your ears on days like this. You lean your back against the warm brick wall, feeling the heat seeping through your tunic and into the bones of your spine. It's a rare comfort, brief and stolen, because you know the timing must now be perfect. The bell will ring soon, and when it does, every housewife in town will begin her ritual march toward your door. Basket in one hand, coin pouch in the other, judgment in both eyes. You can set your sundial by it, and heaven help you if they catch even a whiff of burnt crust or a hint of sourness. Bread is life here, but also currency, status, and scandal. People have opinions, and you're not sure if the mayor's wife is more terrified of famine or a too hard bully. You glance at the oven and mutter a little prayer, not religious, not even superstitious, just a baker's reflex. The kind of words passed down from someone who didn't have time to invent poetry, but needed the gods to behave. Then comes the moment you reach for the long-handled peel, position it beneath the nearest loaf, and with a practiced flick, draw it out onto the board. The crust hisses as it meets the cooler air, cracking slightly, blooming open like an old map revealing its roads. You tap it once, hollow sound. Perfect. First victory of the day. You line them up quickly, crust by crust, row by row, until your counter looks like a battalion of golden shields ready for judgment. You exhale, long and slow, the way one does when carrying a bucket of water, and finally sets it down. And then the bell rings deep, echoing, and impossibly close, like it's inside your skull. The sound slices the morning in half. Matins. Time's up. You begin wrapping the loaves in linen, stacking them 2 by 2 in baskets. Your hands know this part. You don't even watch them. Meanwhile, your ears listen for the sound of footsteps on frost. The first is always Magda. She walks with a limp, so you hear her cane tap the stones before you see her. She calls out before knocking, as always. You hand her the long loaf with a scorched tip. She smiles with all 4 teeth and says something about her cat disapproving of last week's crust. You pretend to laugh, as always. Behind her, the line forms. The miller's daughter, 2 nuns from the convent, a boy who was clearly sent by someone who forgot to rise early. You hand out loaves, accept coins, nod politely. Pretend not to notice who winces at the price increase. Inflation, even in the 13th century, has no courtesy. You mentally calculate your losses. 1 loaf short today. You hope no one important notices. And of course, just then, the bailiff appears short, round, and already sweating despite the cold. He doesn't buy bread. He inventories it. A real crowd pleaser. You smile like you were expecting him and watch his eyes count your stacks. Compare them to his parchment. You've never seen him blink. He nods once, says nothing, walks away. Your shoulders drop half an inch. Behind the line, 2 boys argue over a crust from the previous day. You're not sure if it's touching or tragic. You toss them a burnt end and they scatter like pigeons. Your apprentice arrives at last, sleep still pasted in his eyes. You give him the look, the one that says you've been up since the stars, and he's lucky you don't throw him into the oven. He mutters something about his candle burning out. You point toward the flour bin. No time for excuses. Not today. Not ever. Really. You steal a moment to sit, just one on the bench by the door. Your apron is stiff, your back tighter than the dough 2 days ago when it rose like a brick. You rub your wrists and let your head lean back against the wall, staring at the soot mark from last summer's flare-up. You never did repaint it. Funny how soot becomes a kind of mural if you ignore it long enough. You close your eyes for a second, not to sleep, just to rest the parts of you that think. Somewhere, far down the lane, a cart clatters over stones, chickens squawk, and the world is now officially awake. But you were here first. You were always first. And you know the day better than it knows itself. You can already smell the afternoon rain in the air, the kind that seeps through the chimney and makes the dough sulk. You think about the cracked bowl from last week, your favorite mixing crock. It had a hairline fracture for months, but finally gave up with a loud crack that sounded like thunder in a church. You buried it behind the oven. It deserved that much. People say witches can curse your bread if your crock breaks mid-mix. Historians still argue whether such beliefs were more about ritual or just an excuse for failure. You don't argue. You just bought a new bowl. And now, the shop quiets again. The rush is over. You sweep the flour into corners, gather the stray bits, retie the sack with string you found under the bench. The fire is lower now, ember-colored, contemplative. Like it too needs a nap. You resist the urge. There's more to do, there's always more. But for this one sliver of morning, you're surrounded by the scent of fresh bread and soft echoes. And for once, no one is knocking. You sit there for a moment longer than you should. Legs splayed slightly, elbows on knees, head bowed as if in prayer. Though any gods still listening to a baker are surely half deaf by now. The heat from the oven has settled into the walls, baking the silence into something thicker, heavier. You watch a puff of flour float in the morning light, like it's trying to escape the rhythm of the day. But even dust has a job here. You rise with a grunt, stretch your back, and return to the dough bench where the next batch waits. It's time for round 2 coarser loaves, for the poorer households, and possibly the pigs if there's too much left over. The dough is a little slack this morning. You poke it, frown. Maybe the yeast sulking? It does that. Yeast is alive, after all. Sort of. At least. That's what the traveling herbalist said before selling you a jar of blessed starter that smelled suspiciously like bad cider and goat sweat. You tossed it after 3 loaves came out gray and flat as paddles. Since then, you trust only your old batch, the one you fed every day like a strange, bubbling pet. Sometimes it behaves. Sometimes it pouts. Today, it's pouting. You try to remember if the kitchen was too cold last night, if the air had been too dry, or if you'd simply insulted it with the wrong salt. Yeast has the emotional range of a baroness. Historians still argue whether early medieval bakers truly understood the science of fermentation, or just learned to bribe the dough with silence and superstition. You lean over the bowl and whisper, "Come on, you lazy beast," as if words might coax it to rise. Maybe they will. You throw a cloth over the bowl and leave it alone. Let it think about what it's done. Meanwhile, the apprentice is still pretending to sweep, pausing every few seconds to yawn or glance out the door like a trapped fox cub. You tell him to fetch more water from the well and remind him not to dawdle. He nods and stumbles out, bucket swinging from 2 fingers like it's filled with feathers. Not frost. Alone again. You wipe down the bench, set the proofing baskets in a neat row, and prepare the peels for the next firing. The wood is splintering more every day, but you've mended them so often they feel more stitched than plank. One even has a patch of leather tied at the end, your own clever fix after it chipped, trying to yank out a loaf that stuck like it had opinions. You've thought about making new ones, but the carpenter wants 2 loaves per peel, and honestly, you'd rather wrestle the splinters. Some tools just know your hands too well to be replaced. Outside, the sun is finally visible, stretching across the stones like a yawn made of light. The village is alive now, hooves on dirt, dogs barking at wind, children shouting about nothing important. You hear the blacksmith's hammer start its day with a dull clang. Across the way, the brewer's wife is already hanging out wet laundry, the fabric snapping like it's arguing with the breeze. Your bakery, wedged between a weaver's shop and a crumbling garden wall, hums gently with the echo of loaves cooling and embers settling. The smell is richer now, crust, grain, a whisper of ash. It's the kind of scent that anchors people, that makes strangers stop and breathe deeper without knowing why. And yet, for you, it's just background. Comforting, yes. Sacred, even, but as ordinary as dirt under nails. You check the dough again. Better. Rising slow but steady, like it remembered its dignity. You divide it into equal lumps, shape them roughly, and line them up like sleepy soldiers. There's something satisfying in their uniformity. Even if the crusts will crack differently in the fire, you cover them and glance at the hourglass, a simple thing. It's sand clumped a little with moisture, but still enough to guide the pace of your hands. Time doesn't pass here. It folds. It repeats. You know this by the way your shoulders start to ache at the same moment every day, as if your body has memorized its own sundial. You take a quick sip of Waterdale, thick and slightly sour, brewed by the widow behind the mill. It clears your throat, just barely. You hear a low knock at the side door, the one no one uses unless something's wrong. You open it to find the priest's assistant, red-faced, holding a basket of eggs and looking as if he's swallowed a lie. You squint. He stammers something about an order for the monastery. Extra loaves, thicker crusts, for soaking, he says. Of course, the monks want soft bread that holds shape in broth. He offers the eggs in trade. You take them, not because it's fair, but because your conscience twitches when faced with the linen collars. You tell him to return by midday. He bows, a little too low, and shuffles off. You place the eggs carefully beside the grain sack. They won't last the week. You sigh and begin shaping the next batch. Faster now. The fire's right, the dough's ready, and you still have 3 hours before your hands go numb from repetition. The peel slides in with a hiss, and the loaves puff up slightly, their backs arching against the heat like cats stretching in their sleep. You can already tell these will be better than the morning round. Maybe the flour needed rest. Maybe you did. You close the oven door with a soft clunk and lean your forehead against the frame for a moment, savoring the warmth. The apprentice returns, breathless, a smear of something questionable across his tunic. You don't ask. He deposits the water and immediately spills half. You hand him a cloth. Tell him to try again. Slower this time. He mumbles an apology. You consider being stern. but his ears are already red with shame. You remember your own early days, the burned loaves, the dropped trays, the time you mistook salt for sugar and fed half the village a batch of what they politely called memorable rolls. The memory still stings, but it also softens you. You nod at him. No scolding today. You turn back to the oven. Steam curls from the seams. You lift the door and the scent rolls out like a promise kept. The loaves have darkened at the edges. Crust split open just enough to reveal soft centers, golden and blistered. You pull each one out with practiced care, arranging them on the cooling board like relics in a shrine. This is the best part, the silence between baking and selling. The moment when everything is still warm, still whole, untouched by mouths or coins or complaints. You run your fingers gently along a loaf's curve and feel it hum slightly, the way bread sometimes does when it's perfect. A soft crackle, a sigh, like it knows it's done its job. You glance at the sky, clouds now, heavy and slow, moving in from the east. Rain by supper? Probably. Good. You always like the way rain sounds on the bakery roof. Soft and uncertain, like it's asking permission to stay. You start cleaning again, bench first, then floor, then the bits of dough dried like fossils in the cracks of the stone. You hum a tune you don't remember learning, something your grandmother used to sing, maybe. Something about flour, or nothing at all. The kind of tune that sticks, not because it's beautiful, but because it fits the rhythm of kneading. And now the second round of villagers begins to trickle in. A farmer with mudcake boots, a young girl with a bundle of herbs, a quiet man who always buys 2 loaves and never speaks. You serve them all without a word, just nods and wrap bundles. They disappear back into the world with their warmth in hand. You watch them go, wondering if they'll notice when you're gone, when someone else rises before dawn, someone who doesn't know Magda's burnt crust or the priest's preference for dense middles. But you're not gone yet. The oven still glows, the dough still rises, and the village still wakes to the scent of your work. You scrape the dough remnants from under your nails with the blunt edge of a spoon. Not because you care about cleanliness, no one expects a baker's hands to look like porcelain, but because dry dough under your nails feels like stone when it hardens. And you've learned it'll catch on everything later. The bell from the convent rings again, distant and hollow. And you think for a second that it sounds like a ladle falling into a deep pot. You've always thought church bells were more honest than priests. They ring whether anyone listens or not. Unlike you, if your bread doesn't rise, people don't just stop listening, they start complaining. Loudly, you kneel to sweep a pile of scorched flour and charcoal flakes from beneath the oven, careful not to hit your head on the low arch again. It's happened so many times. You're convinced the oven has grown teeth. The broom loses more bristles each day, and you keep telling yourself you'll fix it. But a new broom costs half a loaf's worth of coin, and besides, the old one still works if you use it like you mean it. You empty the ashes into a bucket, and as you stand, the cinders swirl up and catch the sunlight in a way that makes them look like fireflies. For a moment, it's pretty. Then it's just smoke again. You step outside into the lane to throw the ash into the communal pit. Everyone uses it. No one tends it. You pass the tanner's boy on the way, who gives you a nod and then pretends he wasn't staring at the soot smudged across your face. You don't bother wiping it. Let the dirt speak for you. A woman is scolding her geese further up the road, and a cartwheel squeaks like an old man's knees as it turns past the bakery. The sun is climbing, but slowly, like it's not quite sure it wants to be involved today. You understand that feeling. You stretch your back, feel something click unpleasantly in your shoulder, and head back inside, where the smell of the loaves still lingers, warm and forgiving. It's a little quieter now, which is always dangerous. Too much silence in a bakery usually means something's gone wrong, or is about to. But not today. Not yet. You return to the workbench and start preparing the sponge for tomorrow. It's always like this. Baking is a task that feeds itself endlessly. Finish one day, and the bones of the next are already forming in a bowl of flour and water. You mix by feel. No measurements. You tried writing a recipe once, and laughed at yourself halfway through. Too many when it feels right, and until it smells like phrases. Bakers don't write recipes. They live them. You stir the sponge until it thickens slightly. Then leave it by the window where the sun might catch it if it ever gets around to shining properly. The apprentice is humming again, badly, and you resist the urge to correct his rhythm. Let the boy be young while he still can. He's wiping down the counters like he's afraid the wood will bite him. You remind him to check for mice behind the sacks. They like the corners where it stays warm and dusty. He groans, grabs the broom, and vanishes into the pantry with exaggerated martyrdom. You suppress a smirk. You were him once. You were worse, probably. Your hands are dry now, cracked slightly at the edges where the flowers suck the softness out. You rub in a bit of rendered lard, just enough to keep the skin from splitting. A trick your mother taught you before she stopped baking altogether. Said her bones couldn't take it anymore. Said she wanted to sleep past dawn just once before she died. You don't know if she ever got that wish. You suspect not. Sleep is expensive in this life, and rest never comes with interest. You stare at your hands for a long second, thinking about how many loaves they've shaped, how many burns they've taken, how much heat they've held. You can still feel the ghost of yesterday's scorch on your knuckle. You didn't flinch when it happened. You rarely do anymore. Pain just gets absorbed now, like moisture into old dough. The door creaks again. Not the shop door, the back one. You tense instinctively. It creaks when it opens and groans when it closes. You taught yourself to tell who's coming just from those sounds. This time, it's the widow next door, Agnes, with her ever-perfect shawl and that permanent air of quiet judgment. She's holding a loaf from your rival, the baker across the square, whose loaves are always annoyingly symmetrical. She holds it out like an offering, or a warning. Just thought you'd like to see, she says. You raise an eyebrow, take the loaf, and squeeze the crust. It crunches softly. Good bake. You nod, hand it back, and say nothing. She watches your face too long, then smiles slightly and leaves. You return to your bench with a strange mix of annoyance and amusement. You don't care, of course, but also, yes, you care a little. He uses better flour, sure, more expensive, but his bread has no soul. You've said it 100 times, and it's true, mostly. You go back to shaping a few extra loaves for the folks who'll come knocking just before dusk, claiming they forgot to get theirs earlier. You know they didn't forget. They just hope to get a leftover for cheap. Sometimes you let them, sometimes you don't. Depends on how your back feels and whether the rats were bad the night before. The rats, yes, always clever. You once caught one trying to drag a whole crust up the side of the flour bin using only its teeth and pure determination. You respected it. Then you hit it with a ladle. The trap hasn't worked since. You suspect its friends learned. As you place the new rounds into their cloth-lined baskets, you hear the wind picking up outside. A shutter claps shut down the lane. Rain, definitely. And soon. You hope the apprentice remembered to cover the firewood pile. He probably didn't. You make a mental note to check before supper. The oven's coals are nearly gone now, so you rake them out and set them in the ash bucket. The heat from the oven has dropped to a quiet hum enough to warm the room, but not enough to bake a thing. It's the oven's resting hour now. You envy it. You sit again, this time with a crust from the morning bake in one hand and a smear of cheese on a plate. The cheese is soft, a little sour, traded from the shepherd's wife in exchange for last week's rye loaves. You tear the bread slowly, chew even slower. No rush. Your teeth hurt more when you eat quickly these days. You watch the rain begin to patter gently on the bakery roof. It sounds like parchment being folded again and again. You think of sleep, briefly, but know it won't come. Not yet. The day's not done. There's still cleaning, still sponge feeding, still the inventory to sort. You sigh, take another bite, and try to remember what it felt like to sleep until sunrise. Must have been nice. The boy returns, proudly brandishing a dead mouse by the tail. You make him toss it into the pit, then wash his hands twice. He makes a face, but obeys. You hand him a crust and tell him to eat it slowly. He nods like you've just knighted him. Maybe you have, in a way. Baking is a kind of battle, and bread is your sword. The rain thickens into a steady rhythm, drumming against the roof with a dull persistence of thoughts you'd rather not entertain. And for a few minutes, the world beyond the bakery becomes a watercolor smear. You sit there chewing slowly, each bite of the crust slightly drier than the last, but warm. And that's something. The boy munches beside you, legs dangling off the bench, swinging idly as if his body hasn't yet learned to carry weariness the way yours does. The two of you say nothing. It's a shared silence. Not awkward, but ritual, like the quiet before the next fire. Then, just as you reach for the last bite, the door creaks open again, and in waddles the tax collector, yes, that one, round like a mushroom and just as pale, dressed in ink-stained linen that probably cost more than your oven. He doesn't even greet you, just pulls a scroll from his sleeve, squints at the lines like they might rearrange themselves out of fear, and begins counting, not coins, never coins, loaves, crates, bags. His eyes dart from your shelves to your hands to the apprentice, as if trying to calculate how many hours of labor he's allowed to exploit. He finally speaks, nasal and precise, announcing that due to new grain adjustments, your quarterly flour allotment will be reduced unless you can produce written proof of exemption. You snort, written proof, from whom? The miller. The village priest, neither one would bother lifting a quill for you. You tell him that, politely. He doesn't flinch, just records something on the parchment and steps back into the rain like a ghost made of numbers. You watch him vanish down the lane, scroll swinging in time with his stomach. You resist the urge to throw a heel of bread at him, just barely. You close the door and bolt it this time. The boy asks what happens if you don't pay. You tell him what always happens, nothing at first. Then a fine, then a visit, then someone else's firewood becomes yours, or your firewood becomes theirs. Depends on how loud the priest wants to complain that month. It's a stupid game, but it's the one you play. You tell the boy not to worry, because he will anyway. And worrying with purpose is better than worrying in the dark. He nods. Then he asks if you ever think about leaving. You blink. It's not a question you're used to. You glance at the loaves cooling on the rack, the bowl of rising sponge, the cracked window that rattles in the wind, and you tell him no. Not because you're noble, because you can't, because bread doesn't bake itself, and people don't feed themselves, and someone has to wake before dawn, whether they want to or not. He doesn't quite understand, but he doesn't press, which is just as well. You stand, stretch your arms until your spine clicks again, and then return to the ledger. The ledger is a beast, all its own leather-bound, thick with grime, pages curling at the corners, ink smudged by damp fingers and weary hands. It holds names, quantities, numbers you once cared about and now only tolerate. You flip through, find the current week, and begin marking down loaves sold, sacks emptied, favors owed. The system is part arithmetic, part guesswork, and part superstition. Some lines are coded symbols you invented in your early years to remind yourself which customers cheat, which pay late, which slip you extra butter during Lent. It's a language only your hands remember. Historians still debate whether most small-town bakers kept written records at all, or if oral tracking systems and barter networks rendered paper obsolete for the average tradesman. You suspect both are true, but you keep the ledger anyway, more as a ritual than a necessity. Writing it down makes the work feel tangible, like you weren't just hallucinating crusts and measuring dreams. From the corner of your eye, you spot a movement, something small, quick, darting from under the flour sack. Not again. You call the boy, hand him the broom, and he goes after it like a knight in training. It vanishes, of course. They always do. But the hunt is part of the rhythm now. You'll catch it eventually, or you won't. You return to the task of slicing day-old loaves into chunks for soaking, feeding, or mashing into gruel. It's a humbler second life for bread, but no less important. Nothing is wasted in a bakery. Even failure becomes breakfast. You wrap the sliced pieces in cloth, mark them for the convent kitchen, and set them by the door. The wind howls louder now, a low groan pushing against the shutters like a tired guest asking to be let in. You feed a few logs into the dying oven, not to bake, just to keep the warmth from leaking out through the stones. The chimney smokes unevenly when the wind turns. The draft pulls wrong and makes the back room smell like a wet cloak. You stuff a rag under the door to keep it from seeping in. It doesn't help much, but it's something. The boy offers to patch the leak with wax. and you're surprised by the suggestion. You let him try, let him fail, let him learn that wax is soft and smoke is stubborn. The rattle continues, but at least he tried. The hours stretch in a quiet tangle of tasks, jars to clean, cloths to rinse, flour to sift again in case the mice got bold. You catch yourself humming again, the same nameless tune, and you wonder where it came from. You hum louder, then stop, then chuckle softly at yourself. Rain days always turn you strange. The boy catches you smiling and asks if you ever danced. You scoff, then you admit, yes, once, at a harvest feast, barefoot in the mud, holding a crust of bread in one hand and a stranger's hand in the other. He asks if it was fun. You say you don't remember. You do. You just don't want to share it with someone who still thinks dancing lasts longer than the song. You start a small batch of sweet rolled sugar saved from a trade, cinnamon from a merchant who owed you a favor. You only make them when the weather feels heavy and the sky forgets how to smile. The dough is sticky, slower to form, but rich in scent. You let the boy taste a pinch. He lights up like a candle. It's the kind of thing that doesn't pay, doesn't sell much, and doesn't last, but it reminds you that not everything you bake has to be bread for survival. Some of it can be bread for joy. You arrange the rolls on the tray, slide them into the oven, and close the door gently. The smell alone makes the whole room feel brighter. As the rolls bake, you sit again, hands resting idle for once. You watch the window. Rain has turned the lane to mud, and somewhere beyond the village, a wagon creaks through a puddle the size of a pig's trough. You hear distant laughter, a group of children, probably pretending to be soldiers or wolves or saints. The sound makes you ache in a place you don't have a name for. You remember when your own child played in that lane, and how they once smeared jam on a cooling loaf and declared it art. You said nothing then, just laughed, then cut them a slice. Now, you wonder if they remember it the same way, or at all. The rolls are done. You pull them from the oven, set them on the board, and breathe in the sugar and spice like a holy rite. The boy asks if he can have one. You hand him two. He disappears into the back, crumbs already falling down his tunic. You smile, alone again. The day is slowing now. Fewer knocks, fewer tasks. Still work to do, but nothing urgent. You begin folding the linen cloths one by one, your fingers finding the creases without looking. You hum once more quieter now. Outside, the rain slows to a whisper. Inside, the air holds still, thick with warmth and the scent of cinnamon. You are tired. You are full. And for this one soft hour, the world feels almost enough. Later that afternoon, as the clouds pull back like a yawn stretched too far, you hear the mill's grinding wheel begin its slow, groaning turn again. A dry mechanical sound, almost hollow, echoing faintly down the lane. You've grown used to it over the years, a sound both comforting and mildly irritating, like a relative who never says anything new. The mill's stones have been the village's heartbeat for as long as anyone remembers, and like most heartbeats, it skips and stutters when no one's watching. You've always suspected the miller cheats, not out of malice, just habit. He's got that look too clean for someone who works with dust. His hair never seems to collect the fine coat of white you know too well, and his smile always a little too eager when grain's short, a little too polished when it's not. You've found pebbles in your flour before, smooth, gray ones, about the size of a fingernail. Not enough to break a tooth, but enough to weigh a sack ever so slightly more. You brought it up once. He claimed it must have been sabotage, probably by a rival miller from the next town over. You didn't believe him, but you let it go. Like everyone else, you can't afford to make enemies with the man who controls your flour. Still, every time you sift a new batch, your fingers move just a bit slower, a little more cautiously, as though they expect betrayal from the softest places. Today's batch was no different, slightly musty, and you swear you saw a beetle leg. You didn't tell the boy. He's still young enough to think bread begins with a dough and ends at the crust. Let him have that illusion a little longer. You've been digging through sacks long enough to know that most things in life, even flour, arrive with bits of something you'd rather not know about. You sift it carefully, letting the fine powder fall through your fingers like dry snow, watching for anything that doesn't belong. The smell tells you more than the look if it's sour, if it's wet, if it's too fresh, too dead, too strange. This one smells of old barns and the faint bitterness of something overmilled. You'll make it work. You always do. That's the rule of the trade. You don't throw anything away until it refuses to become bread. The boy returns from the back with his face and hands sticky from sweet roll crumbs, a look of guilt and glory blended into one. You don't scold him. You just hand him a rag. He wipes his face with all the grace of a drunken rooster. Then, as if sensing your thoughts, he asks if flour can go bad. You nod. He asks how you can tell. You point to your nose, then your fingertips. He scrunches his brow, not quite understanding. You tell him it's like friendship if something feels off and smells off. It probably is. He laughs. You're not joking. The rest of the afternoon limps by. You patch a broken basket handle with wire, sharpen your dullest blade with a whetstone so worn it's almost flat, and rearrange the shelf where the sacks live, placing the lightest on top so the boy stops bruising his knees. You don't remember when you started thinking of him as the boy instead of his name? Maybe when he started showing up every morning without being asked. Or maybe when he stopped crying over blisters. You still call him by name when others are around. But alone, it's just boy. And that's enough. He asked you once if you ever had a son. You don't answer. Not because it's a secret, but because there's nothing you could say that wouldn't land like a stone in a quiet room. He doesn't ask again. As the sun begins to lower an orange blur behind thinning clouds, the first hints of evening creep into the bakery. The shadows stretch longer, and the warmth from the oven fades into something cooler, gentler. You light a stub of tallow candle, the flame sputtering like it's uncertain it wants to be alive. Its glow flickers across the shelves, brushing the cooling loaves in gold, casting crooked shapes on the wall behind the cracked crock you still haven't tossed. You glance at the pot and frown, remembering again how it split clean down the side 3 weeks ago without warning. 1 minute, it held dough like a cradle. The next, it cracked with a sound like lightning through wood. You'd heard stories of witches breaking pots with curses, of demons creeping into kitchens through cracked lids. Nonsense. Probably. But even now, you avoid touching it. You've meant to throw it out, but instead, you've left it there, like a warning, or a memorial. Historians still argue whether these tales of cursed cookware were rooted in pagan fears, or merely clever metaphors for bad craftsmanship. You suspect they were neither, just simple ways to explain heartbreak when things you trust suddenly fail. The boy asks why you keep the broken pot. You tell him it's there to remind you not to trust anything without a seam. He doesn't get it, but nods anyway. He's at that age where he thinks everything adults say is either a riddle or a waste of breath. You envy him. You envy a lot of things, most of which you never had. You watch him carry a basket of cooled loaves to the rack by the door, his steps heavier than they used to be, his back straighter, but he's learning. Bread will do that. Teach you about patience, about weight, about what rises and what doesn't. You wonder if he knows yet that most of life is just dough too wet, too dry, too slow, too fast. You never get the recipe exactly right, but if you bake it long enough, people will eat it anyway. Someone knocks at the shutter. Late. You unlatch it and find the cobbler's youngest daughter, clutching a coin in one hand and a torn satchel in the other. She's been crying mud on her face. Lace is undone. She asks for a half loaf, for her sick brother. You don't ask questions. You hand her 2 small rolls, tell her not to mention it, and close the shutter before the guilt climbs any higher. The boy asks what she gave you. You say, a reminder. He furrows his brow, but doesn't ask again. He's learning, too. As twilight deepens, you sit for a final time, this time with a bowl of lentil stew, reheated from yesterday. It's thick, tasteless, and perfectly fine. You eat slowly, listening to the boy sweep for the 3rd time, this time properly. You hear him humming again, and you don't correct the rhythm. It's almost in tune now. Maybe he'll be a singer. Maybe he'll be a baker. Maybe he'll leave before either happens. That's how these things go. The candle dims. You let it. You close the ledger and lay your cloth over the sponge for tomorrow. The oven is silent now. resting like an old horse, its belly full of ash and memory. You breathe in, long and deep, the scent of flour and fire, and fading sweetness still clinging to the air like a lullaby you're almost too tired to hear. You tell the boy to head home before the dark thickens, and he obeys without protest, pausing only to look back once, as if memorizing the way the light pools across the flower-covered stones. You lock the door, bolt it twice, one more check of the sacks, the shutters, the banked fire. You lean against the wall near the door, hands on hips, spine bent slightly, and you sigh the way only bakers sigh, like someone who's held up the whole world with nothing but bread and blistered palms. Tomorrow, you'll do it again, because someone has to, because the oven doesn't light itself, because you remember the taste of hunger, and because no one should wake to an empty table. The next morning begins with the same darkness, the same reluctant stirring from sleep, and the same ache in your legs before your eyes even open. You don't stretch anymore. You simply swing your feet over the edge of the cot and let gravity remind you that time is winning. The floor greets you with its usual chill, and your toes automatically search for your worn clogs half by habit, half by prayer that no mouse has taken up residence in them during the night. One hasn't, but you still shake them out just in case. You rise without a word, light the stub of a candle with practiced flicks of flint and steel, and move toward the oven, which slumbers under its sheet of soot like a beast you've made a pact with. You open the firebox, inhale the faint ghosts of yesterday's heat, and begin feeding it kindling. The apprentice won't arrive for another hour, and by then, the dough will need turning, the sponge will need feeding, and the morning orders will already be in motion. You stoke the fire with deliberate rhythm, coaxing it into a low roar, and whisper to it like it's a child you've raised alone, because, in a way, it is. The flames answer with a flicker, licking the sides of the oven wall, slow but steady. It'll be ready, if you are. As the oven warms, you kneel before the heavy sacks of flour, and reach for the one with the least creases, usually the freshest. You dig your hand into the cool powder, let it sift through your fingers, and feel for any trace of grit, moisture, or worse. This batch feels better than yesterday's drier, cleaner, almost soft. You measure out what you need with no more than a glance, pour it into the trough, and begin to mix it with yesterday's sponge. The scent of fermentation rises instantly sharp, yeasty, a little sour, but alive. It's a good smell, one you trust. You add water slowly, working the mixture with your hands, pulling and pressing and folding it against the wooden board that's older than most of the buildings in this village. The board creaks slightly under your pressure, and a few small cracks along the edge deepen with each push, but you know every mark in its grain by heart. This board has seen births, deaths, famines, and feasts all through the lens of bread. It has never complained, and you love it for that. You knead with more force now, rolling your shoulders into each motion, and as the dough tightens and resists, you remember the first time your father made you knead dough with him. You were 8. You hated it. It made your arms sore, your back ache, and your temper flare. He said nothing while you fumbled, but you still remember the nod he gave when you stopped complaining and started kneading with purpose. He never said well done, just passed you the next lump. You didn't need more than that. Some lessons are loud, others are silent and stick to your ribs like crust. The dough is nearly there now, smooth, elastic, soft like the inside of your elbow. You cover it with cloth, dust the top with flour, and set it near the fire to rise. It'll take about an hour, depending on the mood of the weather and the mood of the dough. You've learned not to rush it. Dough knows when it's being hurried. It sulks. You take this quiet window to clean. Sweep out yesterday's soot, wipe down the counter, and refill the water trough with the last of the rain barrel. You make a note to ask the apprentice to haul more before midday. The sun begins to rise just as you're scrubbing a stubborn patch of dried batter off the side of the trough. Light creeps into the bakery like a thief, sliding across the flour-dusted floor in streaks that make every footprint visible. It's the kind of light that tells you whether the day will be kind or not. Today's light feels thin, watery, unsure of itself. Probably rain again by evening. You sigh and return to your dough, which has puffed slightly beneath its cloth like it's dreaming of something warmer. You uncover it, punch it down gently, and begin to divide it into equal rounds. Your hands move without thought, your fingers reading the weight and tension of each piece, like lines of a poem you've recited for decades. One for the smithy, one for the tavern, one for old Magda and her cats, the rest for whoever knocks early enough. You shape each round with a soft palm and a firm press, letting the seam fall just right along the bottom. Then you line them up on the board, cover them again, and wait. The fire is nearly ready hot, but not searing. The stones inside glowing a soft, even red. You add a few more logs. Let them settle. Then rake the coals to the side so the floor heats evenly. The oven groans slightly, the sound low and full of history. It's ready, too. The apprentice finally stumbles in just as you're sliding the first loaves into the oven. He's breathless, damp, and missing one shoe. You don't ask. He mumbles something about a goose, and you nod as though you believe him. He moves to his duties with sluggish determination, sweeping, fetching, checking the bins. You let him work in silence. The loaves begin to take on color almost immediately. The crusts blister, rise, and brown in slow motion, their scent rising like steam through the cracks in the oven seal. You crouch to peek through the tiny opening, watching them swell and split just so. It's a kind of joy. This moment seeing potential become something solid, golden, real. You wonder if sculptors feel the same when the marble gives way to form. As the first batch cools, you start preparing a second. This time mixing in bits of dried apple you traded for last week. Not enough to sweeten fully, just enough to surprise. You don't tell the boy. Let him discover it in the bake. Let someone bite into it and pause. Confused, then pleased. Bread doesn't have to be loud to be clever. Sometimes it just needs one secret. The door creaks open mid-morning, and the first customer of the day arrives, a farmer's wife with mud up to her knees and a basket that smells faintly of onions. She orders her usual, and you wrap the loaf in cloth and place it gently in the basket. She thanks you with a nod, then pauses and asks if you heard about the trouble at the mill. You freeze a moment. No, you hadn't. She leans in slightly and says someone caught the miller's boy dropping stones into the flour sacks. Just a few, but enough to weigh them down. You smirk. So it wasn't just your suspicion. She mutters something about punishment, then leaves. You watch her go, then glance back at your own flour sack. You'll still check it, of course. Even the truth doesn't replace caution. The boy asks what the woman meant. You tell him it's nothing, just village gossip. He doesn't press, but you see the way he glances at the flour like it might be hiding something sinister. Let him wonder. Let him learn that trust is earned even in grains. As you pull the apple loaves from the oven, you catch a scent that almost makes you forget your back pain. Sweet, yes, but also earthy and warm, like memory made edible. You tear a small piece from the edge of one and chew. It's good, better than expected. You offer the boy a piece. He smiles, chewing with eyes wide. Tastes like orchard bread. He says, you nod. It's not a real name, but it might be now. The rest of the morning passes with a kind of sleepy momentum. The oven cools again, the orders slow, and you find yourself standing in the quiet with nothing urgent to do. The boy begins humming, and this time, you join him just a few notes, then a verse. You haven't sung in years. But here, in the warm silence, it feels allowed. You hum together as the loaves cool, as the fire sleeps, as the light turns golden and low. For a moment, it feels like everything might be okay. The oven exhales a final puff of heat before falling still, and in the quiet, you hear the bakery's settle wood creaking as it cools, flour drifting through sunbeams like lazy snow, and somewhere behind the walls, a mouse scratching too boldly for comfort. You make a note to reset the traps. Again, there's always another one. You pick up a half loaf from the cooling board, its crust still warm, and tap it gently with your knuckle. Hollow sound, good bake. Not perfect, but you've stopped chasing perfection. You've learned that ovens have moods, and that no two loaves ever rise the same, no matter how precise you think you are. The older bakers used to say every oven has a soul, and some are temperamental. Yours is like an old mule, stubborn, reliable only when coaxed properly, and occasionally prone to belching smoke if you insult it with green wood. You recall a morning last spring when a damp log made it wheeze so loudly that the blacksmith thought your roof had collapsed. He came running with a hammer in hand and left with a free roll and soot in his beard. You smile at the memory, then sigh as the current batch cools in the open air, the scent of baked apple and wheat slowly fading into the usual background hum of ash, wood, and long effort. The boy asks if he can take one of the smaller loaves to his aunt. You nod without looking up, and he wraps it with care, lips pressed together in that way children do when they're pretending to be adults. He lingers at the door a moment too long, like he's waiting for you to say something wise or final. You give him a grunt instead and wave him off with a flick of your wrist. He disappears down the lane, and you take the rare, brief stillness for yourself. You sit on the bench by the window, the one that catches the last sliver of sun, before dusk folds the sky in half, and close your eyes, only for a minute, just until the heat behind your eyelids stops pulsing. You let your hands rest palm up on your thighs, rough and pale and cracked, the hands of someone who's shaped more loaves than letters. You listen, not for anything in particular, just to the way the world moves when no one's trying to fill it with noise. It's the sound of wind brushing through thatch, of a distant cartwheel catching on a stone, of a bird hopping too close to the shutters. You think, perhaps, this is the best moment of the day. Not the bake, not the sell, just the sit, the slow, the quiet after creation. Then the oven shifts, a tiny pop, a twitch in the stones, like it's reminding you who's really in charge. You laugh under your breath and rise, joints cracking like dry twigs. There's still cleanup, always cleanup. You sweep the coals to one side, ash settling like gray snow on the hearth floor. You reach for the old iron peel, check its edge, and notice the tip is beginning to split. Again. That's the third time this season. You'll bind it later with wire. Or not. Maybe it's time to retire it, though the thought makes your chest tighten. You've had this peel longer than most of your teeth. It's saved loaves, smacked rats, even once lifted a stunned pigeon off the oven top during a storm. A tool with stories, not just function. You lean it back against the wall with something like reverence and return to scrubbing the bench. Later, while stacking firewood in the corner by the door, you hear a strange sputtering sound from outside, followed by a loud thud and a muttered curse. Curious, you unbolt the door and step into the fading light. A cart has lost a wheel near your stoop, its axle twisted and broken, bags of grain spilled into the mud like open pillows. The driver, an unfamiliar face, lean and gaunt, kneels beside it, cursing under his breath as he inspects the damage. You ask if he needs help. He startles, then shrugs. Not unless you have a wheel, he mutters, half joking. You don't, but you do have hands. You walk over, lift the nearest sack with him, and together you carry it to the dry edge of the bakery wall. He's grateful, if not chatty. You learn his name is Will, that he's headed for the next village, and that he's late because the miller charged him extra for rush grinding. You exchange a glance, no further explanation needed. He rests a moment on your bench, wiping sweat from his brow with a sleeve stiff with flour. You offer him a heel of crust and a mug of lukewarm cider. He accepts both like someone who's forgotten how to refuse kindness. As he eats, you ask about the roads, about the harvest. He says they're worse this year, that wolves are growing bolder near the woods, that a baron somewhere upriver has started taxing carts that pass his land. You listen, not because you're surprised, but because it's good to be reminded that the world beyond the bakery still spins in crooked circles. He finishes the crust, thanks you again, and begins working on the wheel with a grimace and a grunt. You lend him your mallet. It's not made for wheel repair, but like most tools, it does more than it was built for. You stand there, arms folded, watching him work, the light dimming by degrees, the warmth of the oven long since gone. Eventually, he rights the cart, sets the axle with a crude brace of rope and determination, and gives you a nod that says close enough. Before he leaves, he pulls a small cloth sack from the front of the cart and hands it to you. Payment, he says. Barley flour, real fine. You open it. It smells sweet and clean. No pebbles, No bugs. You nod, grateful. He vanishes down the lane, cart wobbling, one wheel singing a sad little song on the ruts. You close the door again and stand for a long moment in the dark, listening to the echo of that cartwheel until it fades completely. Inside, the bakery has cooled. The walls no longer hold the fire's ghost. The air is thick with stillness, like a room waiting to exhale. You place the sack of barley flour on the shelf beside the others, feeling its weight slightly heavier, slightly more promising. You'll try it tomorrow, maybe in a special role, maybe just for yourself. You light a candle, not because you need the light, but because the flame feels like company. Then you sit again on the bench, elbows on knees, eyes half closed, watching shadows drift across the floury floor. The boy hasn't returned. That's fine. He knows the way back. As you sit, the oven sighs one final time, just a pop of cooling stone. You pat its side like an old friend and say nothing. Some days, it speaks more than you do. The candle flickers, the bench creaks. Somewhere, deep in your chest, something loosens. Not everything in this life has a shape, but some things still rise, even if you don't understand how. You reach for your apron, fold it carefully, place it on the hook. The bakery, for now, is quiet. The loaves are gone. The fire is out. But tomorrow waits, kneading itself slowly in the dark. The next morning arrives like a muttered apology, foggy, damp, reluctant, and you feel it in your bones before you feel it in the air. You wake before the candle burns out, as always. But something in your knees whispers that today will be a long one. You swing your legs over the side of the cot and rub your face with hands still smelling faintly of ash and dough. Your back tugs in protest. Your wrists throb slightly, and the muscles along your shoulders feel like they've been sleeping curled in on themselves too tightly, which they have. You mutter to no one as you light the fire, coaxing the first hesitant flames into life with fingers so accustomed to the motion that you no longer think about the risk of burns. The kindling snaps, crackles, then steadies, and for a moment the bakery begins to feel like it remembers warmth. You add a few logs from the stack you wisely covered the day before, then sit back on your haunches and watch the fire catch. There's comfort in its rising glow, predictable, ancient, and alive. The oven always wakes before the village, and so do you. You stand and stretch your arms above your head, feeling the pop of something that shouldn't pop. Then you limp over to the trough and check the sponge you mixed before sleep. It has risen well-bubbled and soft, faintly sour in the nose, just enough to promise a good bake. You smile slightly. That's one thing going right. You mix it into fresh flour, the barley kind gifted by the cart driver, and feel the difference immediately. Lighter, finer, somehow less demanding under the palm. You work the dough slowly, folding and pressing, letting it breathe between motions. The mixture becomes soft and smooth, holding together without argument. Even your hands seem grateful for the change. The flour is good, really good. You make a mental note to ask the driver's route next time, if there is a next time. As the dough rests, you clean the counters and fetch more water. The fog outside is thick now, curling under the bakery door like it's trying to sneak inside. You tighten the shutters and relight the lantern. The boy still hasn't arrived, which is odd. He's usually underfoot by now, sweeping or pretending to. You hope it's nothing serious. Maybe the fog slowed him. Maybe he's overslept. Or maybe he's just found somewhere better to be. You shake the thought off, not out of denial, but practicality. Bread doesn't wait for answers. You set the shaped loaves aside, covered with cloth, and check the oven. Still warming, you crouch. Let your knuckles hover near the stone nearly there. Just a few more logs, and it'll be ready to cradle the dough into form. Outside, the silence is deeper than usual. No footsteps on the lane, no dogs barking, not even the creak of the weaver's old spinning wheel through the shutters. You glance at the window. Still fog, still gray, still motionless. It feels like the world has forgotten to wake up. You return to your work, half lost in the rhythms that have kept you sane, dusting, shaping, lifting, breathing. You place the first batch into the oven as soon as the heat feels right, using the old peel with its patched tip and smoke-darkened grain. You slide each loaf into place with a precision born not of calculation, but of countless repetitions movements your body performs without permission or pause. The bread begins to bake, and slowly the scent fills the air, rich, nutty, earthy, tinged with the subtle sweetness of barley. It smells unfamiliar and yet entirely welcome. You exhale and lean back against the wall, letting the aroma wrap around you like a blanket. It's rare, this feeling being ahead of the day instead of constantly catching up to it. You reach for your mug, sip lukewarm cider, and close your eyes, just for a minute, just long enough to mark the moment as real. Then the door opens. Not a knock, just a slow creak and a gust of cold air. You turn quickly, expecting the boy, perhaps, or an early customer, but it's your rival, the baker across the square, the one with the perfectly shaped loaves and the slightly smug expression. Today, though, he looks less smug, more tired. His shoulders are wet from fog, and he carries a wrapped bundle under one arm. He nods once, says nothing, and sets the bundle on your bench. Then, with a grunt, he pulls a stool over and sits, wiping his hands on a cloth as though this is normal. You raise an eyebrow. He gestures to the bundle. Trade, he says. You open it carefully and find a round loaf, dense, golden, glazed with what looks like egg and honey. You smell it. Rich, slightly sweet. Your stomach tightens involuntarily. He chuckles. Made it for the priest's name day. He said it was too cheerful. You laugh. A short huff of sound. He'd say that about spring. You pour him cider. He nods, thanks, and drinks. The silence stretches between you. Not tense, just unfamiliar. You sit, the oven glowing behind you both, and for a few moments, there are no competitions, no comparisons, no village gossip, just two tired bakers sharing warmth. He asks how your barley turned out. You say it's better than it has any right to be. He says he heard about the miller's son caught with stones again. You both shake your heads. Then he asks if you've seen the boy. You say no. He looks thoughtful, says nothing more. After another long sip of cider, he stands, nods again, and leaves as silently as he came. You unwrap the rest of his loaf, tear off a piece, and taste it. It's good. Annoyingly good, but also kind. You wrap half of it back up and place it by the door. If the boy comes, he'll find it. The loaves are ready. You pull them from the oven, each one proud and tall, their crust blistered just right. You line them up along the counter, tapping each gently with the back of your hand. They sound hollow, finished, alive. The scent of barley fills the room. You imagine someone biting into one and pausing, surprised, delighted. You hope they do. You hope, silently, that something as simple as new flour might make someone's day feel different, just enough. Eventually, the fog begins to lift, slowly, reluctantly, like a curtain being dragged from a window. Shapes reappear on the lane rooftops, fences, a passing dog. Footsteps echo again. Voices rise. Life resumes. The village, delayed by the weight of weather, begins to flow once more past your door. You brush the flour from your apron, open the shutter, and let the smell escape. Within minutes, the first knock arrives, then another. You move without rush, without thought. Each loaf passed from your hands carries something more today, something brighter, however small. Still, the boy doesn't come, and as dusk edges in again, you find yourself standing at the door, half waiting, not worried, not exactly, just aware of absence in the way bakers notice when a crust sets wrong or a loaf comes out too light. You leave the wrapped bread on the step, just in case. You lock the door, but not the hope. You check the sponge, feed it, cover it. Tomorrow waits, like always, but tonight, something feels unfinished. You sit by the dying fire, a bit of your rival's bread in one hand, the other resting on your knee, and you listen again to the silence. It's different now, wider, perhaps, or just more honest. The next morning does not greet you gently. There's a dampness in the air that clings to your joints like guilt. and the sky outside the shutters is the color of old wool, flat, colorless, and thick with the threat of rain that hasn't yet decided to fall. You rise with a stiffness deeper than usual, as if the stones beneath the cot conspired overnight to push back harder. No boy again? You notice it even before your eyes are open. The silence is too clean, too still. You light the candle, its little flame dancing like it knows something you don't, and you step toward the oven, which sulks in its stone casing like a sullen mule. You reach for the firewood and pause. The pile looks off. Something shifted. At first, you think it's the weather wind, maybe, but then you see it. One of your mixing crocks, the small one you use for salt dough, split clean down the side, not cracked, split, as if someone took a wedge and pressed it right through. You crouch and inspect it, but there's nothing else disturbed. The bench nearby is untouched, the flour sack still tied, the tools in place. Still, your stomach sinks. Crocs don't just break like that. Not without heat, not without mishandling, not without reason. You stare at it for a long time, then gently set the two halves beside each other on the bench, like a broken egg waiting for an answer. The rest of the morning unfolds like a loaf baked on the wrong stone off balance. Stubborn, resistant to rhythm, the dough rises too slowly. The oven fights you for heat. The fire coughs, smoke in your face. You bite your tongue more than once, curse under your breath often, and nearly forget to salt the rye batch, only catching it as your hand hovered over the basin. You whisper a thanks to no one and stir it in. You bake because that's what you do. But the energy in the room is different, off. It doesn't help that the boy hasn't shown again. You try not to imagine why. Maybe he's ill. Maybe his family took him to the next village. Maybe he's simply tired of flour in his hair and burns on his wrists. You can't blame him, if that's true. But still it feels wrong to mix without him nearby, to hear only your own steps on the stone floor. The place is too quiet. Even the rats seem hesitant. You half expect the old crock to be repaired when you glance back, but no. Still broken, still silent, still waiting. Then the bell rings. Not the church bell, your door. 3 short knocks. You wipe your hands on your apron, swing the door open, and find Agnes the widow with too many opinions and not enough patience, holding a small, cloth-wrapped parcel and wearing the expression of someone who's about to deliver news you won't like. You wait. She clears her throat, glances down, and says the boy won't be coming. Not today. Maybe not again. You raise an eyebrow. She shrugs. He's not well. Not hurt, but not well. You understand more from what she doesn't say than what she does. You nod once. Take the cloth bundle from her hands. It's honeyed oats. A kind of apology, and close the door before she can offer more pity. You set the bundle aside. You stare at the bench. You breathe in, then out, as if trying to knead your own breath into something useful. The bakery needs tending. Always does. You return to your bench and pull the next loaf from the fire. It's slightly overdone. Not burned, but darker than usual. Its crust cracked with a kind of irritated defiance. You cool it anyway. People will still eat it. People always eat it. The second batch is better, softer, lighter. It gives under your thumb just right. As you move through the morning, customers trickle in, a few commenting on the smell, fewer noticing your silence. You serve them. You smile. When appropriate, you keep moving. It's what bakers do. There's always another round to mix, another bin to check, another cloth to wash. But even as your hands keep their rhythm, your mind lingers on the crock, on the boy, on the peculiar silence that hangs heavier than the fog did yesterday. By midday, the bakery is warm, humming with the scent of barley and rye. You sit for a moment, letting your spine fold forward, your elbows on your knees, your eyes closed. The heat of the oven radiates behind you, a comfort and a burden all at once. You listen to the crackle of cooling loaves and think of the old superstitions about cracks in pots being signs, about bad luck traveling through broken things like wind through a leaky roof. Historians still argue whether such tales were born of truth or fear. Whether the folk knowledge of bakers and weavers and potters was based on pattern or desperation, you don't argue. You just sit, and after a long while, you rise again and get back to work. That evening, as the sun dips behind the chapel spire and throws long shadows across the square, your rival returns, not to trade, just to sit. He brings no loaf this time, only silence and a bottle of cider that tastes better than yours. You share it without talking. For a while, you both watch the fire fade. He mentions the boy only once, quietly. Good hands, he says. You nod. Then, out of nowhere, he tells you about a crock that broke in his bakery once split during a feast week, right in the middle of mixing. He claims it was a sign, that his wife took it as a warning to leave, that she left the next day, didn't even take the linens, just walked, left bread rising on the board. You don't respond. There's nothing to say. Some stories aren't meant to be answered, only held. When he leaves, the air feels different again, cooler, still. You clean up slower than usual, letting the rag drag across the stone like it's pulling thoughts with it. You sweep flour into the cracks, wipe the counters, close the shutters. You don't touch the broken crock. You just let it sit there, quiet and broken, a reminder that not everything you shape holds. Later, with the candle burned nearly to the base, you sit on your bench with a hunk of dark crust in your hand, staring at the place the boy used to sit. You try not to wonder if you could have said more, encouraged him better, protected him somehow. But you know that's not how it works. People aren't dough. They don't rise just because you're careful. You finish your crust in silence, the crumbs catching in the folds of your apron, and lean your head back against the wall. The stones are cool now, and the fire is only a faint orange ghost. You listen for footsteps that won't come. You let your eyes close, and in the last breath before sleep creeps over you like a cooling cloth, you think, maybe tomorrow. He'll be back. Maybe not. Either way, the dough will need kneading, the fire will need lighting, and the bread, well, the bread never waits. The next dawn arrives without color, just a slow seep of gray into darker gray, and you feel it most in your fingers, the joints stiff, the skin dry and flaking like a crust left too long in the fire. You push yourself upright without complaint, but the ache in your shoulders clings like wet linen. The cot groans under your weight, a sound so familiar it may as well be part of your morning prayer. The room is cold, not cruelly so, but enough to make the first barefoot steps across the stone floor a reminder of what it means to earn warmth. You light the candle by instinct, then walk to the oven and kneel beside it like a supplicant. The firebox is black and silent, its mouth slack and waiting. You reach for kindling and coax it back to life, the tinder catching slow this morning, as if the flames themselves are reluctant. You mutter encouragement as you work, half out loud, half in memory. When the coals finally bloom red, you rise, stretch your back, and begin the same ancient dance you've performed so many mornings now that your body remembers it better than your name. You mix the sponge with new flour barley again, a small sack left over from the week's trades and water drawn from the barrel just before the freeze crept into it. The dough is stickier than usual, clinging to your palms like a child afraid of being left. You dust your hands with more flour and knead through the resistance, pressing and folding, listening to the sound of your breath and the creak of the bench beneath your weight. As you work, you think not of bread, but of the boy. It's been 3 days since you last saw him. That silence no longer feels accidental. It hangs heavy in the bakery, heavier than smoke, heavier than the loaves. You keep expecting to see him appear around the corner of the pantry, smudged and yawning, making excuses about geese or spilled water, asking for a crust or a story, but nothing. No knock, no clatter, no humming, just the quiet. You don't ask around. Not yet. There's a part of you that doesn't want to know. Knowing means finality, and finality is not a luxury a baker can afford. There's always the next batch, always more dough. The loaves that rise today are slow to puff. Maybe it's the flour, maybe it's the cold, maybe it's you. You form them anyway, line them in baskets, cover them gently with cloth, each one shaped with care but not affection. You work like someone watching the clock they don't want to admit they built. When the fire reaches full strength, you feed it again, not because it's ready, but because it demands. You open the bakery door to sweep the step and find frost clinging to the stone in patterns that look almost like letters. You stare for a long time, not reading them, but letting their shapes hold your eyes. A trick of nature, surely. But the longer you stare, the more they seem to resemble runes or symbols you've forgotten how to understand. You scrape them away before they settle too deeply into your thoughts. By mid-morning, the first batch is in the oven. The loaves hiss and rise, the crust blooming in slow motion bursts. You stand watch like a sentry, peel in hand, eyes narrowed, not at the fire but at the spaces in between the corners of the bakery where shadows settle and memories root. It's quieter than usual today. Even the outside world seems subdued. Few footsteps, no dogs, no cartwheels singing over cobbles. Just the whistle of wind through the cracked window and the rustle of your apron against your knees. You pull the loaves when they're ready, stack them on the cooling board, and then sit, elbows on your thighs, watching the steam rise in faint ribbons. You don't eat, you don't sip, you just listen. And then, behind you, a knock not at the door, but at the side shutter, a soft, careful knock. You rise so fast your stool skids. You swing the shutter open and see a girl, 10, maybe 11, standing with a shawl wrapped 3 times around her head. Eyes too large for her face. She says nothing, just holds out a bundle wrapped in cloth. You take it. It's warm, heavy, familiar. Bread. Your bread. You open the cloth slowly and find a loaf, one of yours. Torn open and half-eaten, crust still firm. There's a folded scrap of parchment tucked under it, smudged with ash and thumbprints. You unfold it, expecting nothing, but find 3 words, "He remembers you." You glance up, but the girl is already walking away, shawl trailing behind her like a question you'll never answer. You stand there holding the loaf, the note, the cloth, and for a moment, the warmth from the bread seeps into your palms like forgiveness. You close the shutter, return to the bench, and sit down slowly. You don't cry, not really. Just sit with a silence deeper than flour, deeper than ash, something old and raw that lives in the cracks of the bench and the splinters of your palms. You break off a piece of the loaf and chew. It's good, better than it should be. Maybe because it's yours, maybe because it was returned. The rest of the day passes in a hush. You move slower, bake fewer, speak less, but everything you do carries a weight now, not heaviness, but depth, like the way soup thickens overnight, or how wood darkens with age. The bakery, once just walls and fire, feels like something closer to home. You clean more carefully, you organize the pantry, you even fix the latch on the back window that's been sticking since last harvest. Little things. Things the boy always meant to do but never quite finished. As dusk falls, you prepare one final batch, just 3 loaves. Small, dense, sweetened with the last of your dried fruit. Not for sale, not for trade, just something made with memory. You let them rise slowly, then bake them with care, watching their crust darken with a kind of reverence. When they're done, you wrap them in fresh linen and set them on the shelf by the window. If he comes again, he'll find them. If he doesn't, someone else will. Either way, the warmth will be waiting. Before you close for the night, you light a fresh candle and place it near the broken crock. The 2 halves still sit side by side, unchanged. You don't try to repair it. Some things stay broken, but the light flickers across the surface and makes it look whole again, if only for a moment. You stand in the center of the bakery, surrounded by the smell of cooling bread, the creak of settling wood, the hush of night, and you feel something shift, not healed, not fixed, just softened. The fire dims, the floor cools, the dough for tomorrow sleeps beneath its cloth. You close the shutters, bolt the doors, wipe your hands, and sit one last time on the bench. The night is quiet, but not empty. Outside, the wind sighs through the eaves like an old song trying to remember its words. Inside, You hum just a few bars. The same tune the boy used to butcher with his flat notes and shameless confidence. You hum it correctly, slowly, softly, for no one, for everyone. The next day begins not with a sound, but with a smell of something faint, almost forgettable, like old smoke clinging to the edge of a thought. You wake with your nose twitching, not in alarm, but in recognition. The fire didn't take properly last night, and you can already feel the lingering dampness in the stone walls, the way it settles into your joints before you've even stood. You roll off the cot with a quiet grunt, feeling the stiffness in your knees like an old friend who's overstayed their welcome. The room is dim, and the air holds a chill that's not quite sharp, but insistent. You light the candle, then crouch by the hearth, coaxing the sullen coals back to life. They respond, eventually, like an animal waking reluctantly in the cold. You feed the fire slowly, then sit back and watch as the flames stretch and twist, catching hold and warming the front of your shins while your back still feels like it's under a wet blanket. Another day begins. You check the dough you mixed before lying down last night. It rose well smooth, domed, slightly glossy on top. A good start. You run a finger along the edge, testing the tension, then begin to divide it without speaking. The silence suits you this morning. There's no apprentice to fill it with poorly tuned humming, no footsteps outside to signal the start of someone else's day. It's just you and the dough and the slow, reliable hum of the fire behind you. As you knead, you think about the seasons, how they shape the work. In winter, dough rises slower, crusts crack harder, and everyone wants something hot in their hands. In summer, it's the flies you curse and the fast-rising sponge that catches you off guard. Lent is the hardest, though not because the work is heavier, but because everything feels denied. No butter, no cheese, no milk. The rules hang in the air like smoke, making every loaf feel like a test of humility. You remember once trying to sneak a bit of lard into a batch during Lent, thinking no one would notice, but they did. Not by taste, by texture. They said the bread felt too happy, and in Lent, no one trusted happiness. You shape the loaves and set them on the board to rest. They'll rise again, slower this time, but stronger. You drape them in cloth and move on to the next task, checking the stores. The flour bins are low, and you'll need to visit the mill before the week is out. You groan, not at the chore, but at the man who'll meet you there. You can already see his smile, too wide, too white for someone who deals in dust. He'll offer you a scoop of the good grind, just enough to show he could give you more. If you ask the right way, you won't. You never do. You take what's owed and nothing else. Let others trade favors. You trade loaves, and even those come dear. You sweep the floor next, watching the flour dust rise and fall in the pale light, seeping through the cracked window. Every stroke of the broom reveals layers of days past, scraps of crust, splinters of wood, a flake of dried fruit that must have rolled off a festive loaf weeks ago. You pause over it, not because you're sentimental, but because it reminds you that sweetness leaves a trail, even when forgotten. You sweep it away with the rest, then fetch the water jug and refill the trough for mixing. Your hands ache more than usual today. You flex them one at a time, watching the skin bunch around the knuckles like old leather. These are not the hands of a dreamer. These are the hands of someone who measures time by what's risen and what hasn't. You tend the fire again, rake the coals, and pull the first batch of loaves from the oven. The crusts are darker than usual. Lenten bread always bakes differently. Drier, less forgiving. You line them up on the board and brush the tops with a cloth. Not to clean them, but to give your fingers something to do. There are fewer loaves today, not because of shortage, but because Lent makes everyone more cautious. The priest told you last week that moderation sharpens the soul. You told him hunger sharpens the tongue. He didn't laugh, but his sister did, and she still comes for your rye every Friday. A knock at the door interrupts your thoughts. You open it to find a monk young, nervous, holding a basket covered in linen. He asks for 6 loaves. For the fast, he says, we'll dip them in broth. You nod and hand him 6 that look just soft enough to soak without dissolving. He thanks you with a slight bow. then hesitates. They say, "Your bread holds longer than most." He says. You shrug. "I don't let it know it's being watched." He frowns, confused, then walks away. You close the door and chuckle quietly. Bread is like people, perform better when left alone. Later, an older woman you don't recognize arrives, wrapped in too many layers for the mild cold. She has the look of someone who's been crying for so long, she no longer bothers to wipe her cheeks. She asks for a crust, not a loaf, just the end. You hand her one without a word, then another. She doesn't say thank you. She just cradles the pieces like they matter more than anything else in the world. You watch her go, wondering if she'll eat them or offer them to the wind. It's not your business. Bread doesn't ask where it's going, it just feeds. By midday, the bakery is warm again, not just from the oven, but from the sun finally pushing through the clouds. The light spills across the bench in long rectangles, illuminating the steam rising from a cooling loaf in the window. You sit beside it, resting your elbows on the sill, and look out at the lane. Still no boy, still no shawled girl, still no note. The loaves you left on the ledge yesterday were gone by morning, but that's all you know. You tell yourself it's enough. It isn't. You finish your lunch, slowly dry lentils, a heel of bread, and the last of the cider that's turned too sharp. It all tastes like penance. Fitting, you suppose. You spend the afternoon mixing a small batch of barley loaves, this time shaped into rounds with slashes that form quiet symbols, nothing dramatic, just marks to tell them apart. You make one with a spiral, one with a line, one with a cross that's not quite a cross, the kind of marks you used to make with the boy, when he insisted every loaf have a name. You place them in the oven and sit on your bench, watching the fire reflect in the broken croc's curve, still cracked, still listening. By sundown, the loaves are done. You pull them gently, lay them on the board, and trace your finger along the spiral. You don't know why. You just do. The bakery smells like barley and ash, and faint sweetness enough to comfort, not enough to fill. You line the loaves near the window again, just in case. You place a small candle beside them, let it burn low. You say nothing, you expect nothing, but you leave the door unlatched. And when the wind rustles the shutters later that night, just once, like a breath pressed too close to your ear, you pause, you listen, and then you return to your bench. You hum the quiet tune again, not because you believe it will bring him back, but because it reminds you that someone once knew the words. By the time the next morning arrives, you've already been awake for hours, not because you had work to do, though you always do, but because your sleep broke itself into fragments too small to hold anything restful. You lay on your cot through the last of the night, listening to the wind pull at the shutters, the soft drip of condensation from the eaves, the distant clatter of something you'll never identify. When the sky begins its slow shift from black to charcoal, you rise, not refreshed, but relieved. The bakery is quiet as you light the candle and begin the same motions you've repeated every day for longer than you care to count. The sponge has risen well, the flour is still dry enough, and your hands, though stiff, respond with their usual discipline. You knead slowly this morning, not out of weakness, but intention. The dough folding over itself like old thoughts, returning for another pass through your memory. You don't try to stop them anymore. They come with the work. You mix, shape, cover, and set the loaves aside, your sleeves dusted in white and your apron stained with yesterday's care. You tend the fire next, prodding the coals until the oven groans with new breath. The flames climb eagerly today, as if they've missed being useful. You know the feeling. As the oven warms, you find yourself reaching for the old peel, running your fingers along the worn shaft, the places where your grip has worn the wood smooth. It's not splintering yet, but close. One day, it'll snap, and when it does, you'll feel it in your ribs. You set it gently against the wall and turn to check on the loaves. Still sleeping. Good. You pour a mug of water, take a slow sip, and look out through the warped glass of the side window. The village is beginning to stir. A pair of women cross the square, shawls drawn tight, their steps brisk and their conversation private. A dog darts after a bird it will never catch. The chimney from the smithy coughs a plume of black smoke. Life, as it insists on doing, continues. You wonder, idly, how many loaves you've made since the first one. 1,000, 10,000. You don't try to count. Bread is like breath. It doesn't make sense to tally what keeps you alive. By mid-morning, the dough is ready. You shape the loaves with practiced speed, marking each one with a slash that matches the order one for the schoolhouse. One for the brewer's wife, one for the convent, and just one marked with a spiral again. You don't know why you keep making that one. It's not spoken for. No one asked for it. But you make it anyway. Maybe for him, maybe for you. The oven is hot enough now, so you load the loaves one by one, sliding them into the mouth of heat with a gentle twist of the wrist. The door closes with a soft thud, and the bakery begins to hum again. You sit on the bench, your back to the wall, your eyes half-lidded as you listen to the quiet sounds of baking, the faint crackle, the tiny hisses, the breath of dough becoming bread. It's the kind of silence you only notice when you've lived long enough to be grateful for it. The first knock comes around the time you expect. A short rap on the front shutter. You open it to find the brewer's wife, red-faced and smiling as she always is, though her smile falters when she sees your expression. You hand her the loaf, still warm, wrapped in linen, and she hesitates before speaking. "You look tired," she says, not unkindly. You shrug. The fire doesn't build itself. She laughs at that, but softly. "Nor does the bread," she adds. You nod. She turns to go, but then pauses. "I saw him," she says quietly, 2 nights ago, down by the river, sitting with his feet in the water. Looked well enough, but far off. You nod again, slower this time. She doesn't wait for a reply. She just leaves you standing there, loafless, the heat from the oven suddenly feeling too close. You return to the bench and sit again. Not because you're tired, but because you need to let that sentence settle. Far off. You think about what that means. Not gone, just distant. And distance, unlike absence, is something that can change. The loaves are ready. You pull them out carefully, one by one, their crust browned, their shapes proud. You line them on the board, letting the steam rise like ghosts of effort past. The spiral loaf sits at the end of the line, its mark clear and centered. You let it cool, then wrap it gently and set it by the door, just as you've done every day since he vanished. You don't look for footprints anymore, but you still listen, not with hope, with habit. The rest of the day is busy, which helps. The schoolhouse sends a boy to fetch their usual. The convent sends 2 nuns, both with scowls that soften when you hand them a small heel of barley bread you didn't charge for. A man from the next village stops by for the first time, says he's heard you bake with barley like no one else. You nod, hand him a loaf. Watch his eyebrows lift in surprise when he bites into it. Word travels, you suppose, even from mouths full of crumbs. Later, when the sky begins to bruise into dusk, a new sound fills the bakery. The door creaks, not knocks, and opens just far enough for a draft to slip in. You turn quickly, heart in your throat, but it's not the boy. It's the miller, of all people. He stands there awkwardly, hat in hand, eyes darting toward the fire, then the loaves, then the spiral one on the shelf. You nod. He steps inside. "I brought something," he says, holding up a small sack, fresh ground, no stone. Swear it. You take it from him, feel the weight, good grind, clean. "Why, you ask?" He shrugs. He used to talk about your bread like it was magic. Said it made mornings easier. Figured it was time I stopped pretending he didn't matter. You nod. Say nothing. The miller shifts his feet, then adds, "You're not the only one who misses him." Then he leaves, door shutting gently behind him. You sit with the sack in your lap for a while. It smells of effort and apology. You rise slowly, place it on the shelf, and return to your bench. You light a candle and set it beside the spiral loaf again, just in case. The light flickers, catches on the glass, throws shadows across the walls like shapes you half remember from dreams. You stare at them, let them dance. The bakery is quiet again, not empty, just resting. You hum the tune again. Only this time, you let it trail off into silence instead of finishing the verse. Outside, the moon slips through the clouds like it's looking for something it lost. Inside, the dough for tomorrow waits, sleeping beneath its cloth, and you, sitting beside the fire, hands folded and heart unspoken, wait too, not for return, but for rhythm. It rains again the next morning, not a storm, just a steady, persistent whisper against the roof that makes everything feel older than it is. You wake with the weight of it pressing through the air, that peculiar damp heaviness that seems to settle into stone, cloth, and bone alike. Your first steps are slower today, not because of reluctance, but because the bakery itself feels sluggish. The fire refuses to catch at first, the kindling snapping with damp stubbornness, and you find yourself muttering to it, not quite swearing, but not exactly coaxing either. It finally flares to life, smoke curling into the chimney with visible reluctance. You rub your arms while it builds, the ache in your joints stronger now, persistent in a way that doesn't ask for attention but insists on it anyway. You ignore it. There's dough to mix, flour to check, and orders to prepare. The rhythm remains. Even if your hands drag slightly through each step, you reach for the miller's flour, his no-stone promise sack, and run your fingers through the top. It's fine. Too fine. Maybe. Your hand sinks into it like dry snow, and you think for a moment about how strange it is that something so soft can hold so much weight. You weigh out what you need. Add water slowly. Let the sponge and salt mix in with quiet intention. The dough comes together easily. Almost too easily. You don't trust it. You need anyway. Watching for texture, for resistance, for anything that tells you this flour has a mind of its own. Nothing. Just smooth, compliant elasticity. You shape it, set it to rise, and move on. The rain thickens as the morning drags on, puddling at the doorstep, seeping through the loose mortar by the back wall. You stuff a rag under it, the same way you always do, but your knees complain more than usual when you crouch. No apprentice to send for repairs, no boy to fetch extra rags, just you and the low hiss of the oven, which is now warming properly but not generously. The fire seems to know how you feel. You roll your sleeves, tie your apron tighter, and begin preparing the boards for shaping. Each motion is deliberate. Each fold, each press, each tuck of dough. The loaves today are a little smaller, not by necessity, but by design. It's Lent, after all, and nobody wants to look like they're enjoying themselves too much. The church is quieter this season, and not just because of the rules. Something's shifted. You can feel it in the way the priest's voice has taken on a softer edge, less commanding, more tired. People walk a little slower these days. Conversations die quicker. Even laughter seems to pause before escaping the mouth, like it's unsure if it's allowed to exist. You pull a tray of loaves from the oven mid-morning, their crusts mottled with steam and slightly uneven. Not your best batch, but far from your worst. You line them on the cooling board and begin brushing off excess flour. The spiral loaf, yes. You made another sits at the end. You didn't even think about it when you shaped it. Your hands just moved on their own. You set it aside, wrap it, and place it near the window where the boy used to sit. The space feels less hollow when something waits there. You light the candle again, let it burn low, and return to your work without glancing back. Outside, the rain shifts into sleet, tapping at the shutters like a polite reminder that spring is still a rumor. Just before midday, a familiar knock at the front shutter. You open it expecting Magda or the brewer's wife, but instead, it's the rival baker. Again. He's soaked this time, shawl pulled low over his brow, and in his hand, another bundle. You raise an eyebrow. He shrugs and holds it out. Traded for honey, he says. Figured you'd use it better than me. You take the parcel, unwrap it, just slightly golden syrup pooled at the corner. Beeswax tucked in with it. You nod. Still trying to be liked, you ask. He chuckles. No, just trying not to be remembered badly. He doesn't stay long, just long enough to pass the honey, glance at your loaves, and say, They smell different today. You don't ask if he means better or worse. He leaves without clarifying. You set the honey on the shelf, but not before tasting a drop with your pinky. It's strong floral, wild, not the refined kind, but there's honesty in it. You consider using it tomorrow. Maybe in a small batch, maybe in something round, something that holds more than bread. You turn back to your bench and resume shaping the next round. Your arms feel heavier now, not from labor, but from thought. The boy, the rain, the rival baker's unexpected peace offerings, they all swirl around you like the flower motes that never settle. You hum to clear your head, just a few notes. The tune catches in your throat, but you finish it this time. Not perfect, but full. The afternoon brings fewer customers, which is typical for this kind of weather. Those who do arrive track mud across the stone and speak in whispers. One man offers a loaf back half eaten, says it was too sad to finish. You don't ask what that means. You take it, slice off the untouched end, and set it aside for the chickens. The rest, you burn. Not because it's wasted, but because some bread carries weight you don't want passed on. The fire hisses as it takes the crust. You don't watch it burn. You move on. The spiral loaf is still untouched. You glance at the window. No footprints. Just sleet. Around sunset, the wind picks up, rattling the shutters and making the chimney whistle in long, uneven gasps. You boil water for tea, though the herbs are old and flavorless. Still, the warmth helps. You sip it slowly, seated on your bench, watching the spiral loaf from across the room like it might twitch or speak. It doesn't, but it waits. You wonder again what it means to be remembered not just by name, but by the things you leave behind. A tune, a slashed mark in dough, a habit of lighting candles beside bread. You think about the boy's humming, the way he never finished sweeping, the way he always called the crack in the crock, the old smile. You've started calling it that too, quietly, only in your head. When night falls, you place the spiral loaf by the door, light another candle, and leave the shutter unlatched. You do it now with no expectation, only rhythm. The candle flickers in the draft, casting long shadows across the walls, the loaves, the tools hanging crooked on their hooks. You wipe down the counters one more time, place the miller's flour back into the bin, and rake the fire into a slow smolder. The bakery dims, and with it, your thoughts settle. Not into clarity, just into stillness. You sit on your bench, one hand resting on your knee, the other draped across the back rail, and you listen to the wind and the hiss of cooling bricks. Before bed, you check the door again. Still closed, still no boy, but the loaf is gone. The cloth, too. No note this time. No token, just absence. You close the door slowly, quietly, and press your back against it for a moment before turning away. Not sorrow, not relief, just a nod between days. Something passed through, something went on. The morning arrives before light, as it always does, but this time it feels different, not heavier or colder, just oddly alert, like the walls of the bakery are awake before you are. You open your eyes to the smell of damp ash, faintly sweet and bitter, the residue of yesterday's fire still lingering like a half-finished sentence. You sit up slowly, joints clicking into motion like old hinges, and listen. No rain, no wind, just the hush of a quiet morning, unbroken. You rise and move through the familiar ritual, lighting the candle, kneeling before the hearth, feeding the coals. But today, the fire takes quickly. One spark, one breath, and the flame leaps to life like it's been waiting. You watch it catch hold, then sit back on your heels and feel its warmth creep toward you with unexpected gentleness. A good omen. Maybe you don't believe in omens, but you note them anyway, the way all bakers do. When you've spent your life watching dough rise and fall, based on the subtlest changes, heat, air, time, touch, you learn to notice everything, even if you don't always understand it. The sponge you mix before bed has risen perfectly, its surface domed and dimpled with the tiny breaths of a living thing. You touch it with reverence, like waking a child. The flour goes in next barley again. with a touch of the miller's finer grind and water drawn fresh from the well before the sun is up. You stir, knead, fold. The dough comes together with satisfying cohesion, elastic and warm beneath your palms. As you work, you find yourself humming again, the same tune, the one the boy mangled but never let go of. You hear it in your head with each motion, and though you try to shake it, your hands have already adopted the rhythm. You let it play, the dough seems to like it. When it's ready, you shape it into rounds. Mark a spiral on one, then two more this time, different one with a dot, one with a line. You're not sure why. You don't think about it. You just move. With the loaves resting beneath their cloth, you step outside for the first time in days. The air is crisp, and the village feels paused, like a breath drawn but not released. Smoke rises from a few chimneys. A rooster tries half-heartedly to announce himself and gives up midway through. You glance down the lane toward the river, then back toward the bakery. No signs, no people, just morning. You carry the water bucket back inside, passing the broken crock on the way. It hasn't moved, of course, but the light hits it differently today. Less like a crack, more like a seam. You don't smile, but your breath catches, just slightly. As the oven heats, you prepare the space, dusting the bench, sweeping the floor, checking the stores, everything in its place. The loaves go into the oven with ease, the fire at just the right pitch, and you sit to watch. You've always said this is your favorite part, the quiet rise, the way the dough lifts and opens, the color blooming across the crust like a slow sunrise. Today, it's especially true. Something about the simplicity of it, the certainty, anchors you. You sip weak cider and close your eyes, letting the scent fill your chest. When you open them again, the loaves are ready. You pull them out, line them up, and mark each one with a brush of oil for shine. The spiraled one sits closest to the window, as it always does. The door opens later than usual, an old man this time, face you don't know, wrapped in a cloak that smells of smoke and lavender. He asks for a small loaf and offers you a coin that's been rubbed nearly flat. You take it, hand him a warm crust, and he holds it like something sacred. They say your bread speaks. He mutters. You raise an eyebrow. What's it say? He shrugs. Don't know. I never listened before. He leaves with a quiet step, and you return to the bench, a little amused, a little uneasy. Bread doesn't speak, but maybe it does. The day unfolds with familiar rhythm loaves traded, crumbs swept, questions dodged. The spiral loaf remains untouched. You wrap it again, place it by the shutter, light the candle, not out of hope, just consistency. The village is slow today. People speak softer, hold their baskets tighter. Something in the air. Lent weighs heavy this week. You don't mind. The quiet suits you. You spend the afternoon reshaping the storage shelf, scrubbing the corners that haven't been touched in months, and mending the split in the wood near the hearthstone with a bit of wire and wax. The work is good, the silence even better. Just before dusk, a shadow passes the window. You see it, but don't move. Then a soft knock. You open the door to find no one, just the empty step and a small object sitting neatly on the stone, a button, round, dark wood, cracked down the center. You pick it up slowly, turn it over in your palm. Familiar, maybe not. You don't see anyone down the lane. You look anyway. Then you step back inside, close the door, and hold the button in your palm as if it might speak if you give it enough time. You place it beside the spiral loaf and sit. The candle flickers, the oven sighs. Outside, dusk settles into night like flour settling onto stone. You don't bake again that evening. The loaves are enough. You eat a crust slowly, tearing it with your teeth, letting it soften on your tongue. You think of the boy, not the absence, but the presence, the hum, the questions, the messy hands. You remember how he called the fire the dragon's belly, and how he once tried to name every single loaf. You never let him finish. You regret that now. You would have liked to hear the names. You chew the bread in silence and let your chest tighten, then soften. You reach for the button again. roll it between your fingers, and wonder where it came from, who it belonged to, what it meant. You won't ask around. You don't need to. When the stars rise, you don't light a new candle. You let the room darken slowly, the way the dough darkens at the edge before a bake. You place the button on the shelf beside the broken crock and the spiral loaf. Then you sit on your bench, hands folded in your lap, and close your eyes, not to sleep, not yet, but to feel the warmth of the day settle around you like steam from a good bake. You listen again, not for footsteps, not for knocking, just for breath. The breath of the oven, the breath of the bench beneath you, the breath of the bakery itself, still and alive. The fire dies low, the room cools, but the air holds something full, something complete, like the last note of a song that doesn't need to be sung again. You stay there for a long time, unmoving, a figure shaped by flour and time and small kindnesses. And outside, the village dreams without knowing that the bread is still warm, and the baker is still listening. The next morning slips in without fanfare, like someone who lets the door close quietly behind them. You rise not because the sun calls you. There is no sun today, just a pale, indifferent smear in the sky, but because your body wakes itself now, by habit more than will. The air is still, almost heavy, and you feel it in your knees before your fingers even touch the floor. You stretch slowly, carefully, with the kind of deliberation one gives a fragile hinge. The bakery around you feels hushed, not empty, but reverent, as if it, too, is holding something close to the chest. You light the candle, watch the flames sway in a draft you can't feel, then move to the hearth. The fire has died entirely, and the stones are cold. You kneel and rebuild it, slowly, hands moving with that quiet muscle memory that asks for no thought. The tinder lights on the second try. The logs catch after some coaxing. You sit back and wait. The light rises. The warmth follows. The day begins. You check the sponge from the night before. It's overproofed, risen too far, collapsed slightly at the edges. You sigh, not in frustration, but in recognition. Even good intentions can go soft in the dark. You scrape it into the trough, add flour, salt, and water, and begin to knead. The dough feels sluggish at first, then begins to respond, tightening under your hands like a tired horse remembering its gait. You work in silence. The only sound, the rhythm of your breath, and the faint groan of the bench beneath your weight. As you fold, you think of yesterday's button, still sitting beside the broken crock and the untouched spiral loaf. You haven't moved it. You don't know if you will. It doesn't ask to be moved. It just stays. That, in itself, feels like a message. Maybe not from the boy. Maybe not from anyone. But presence doesn't always come with explanation. Sometimes it just comes. The dough rests under its cloth. You sit at the bench and sip a mug of water, cool and sharp from the barrel, and let your gaze wander across the room. Every corner holds a history. That dent in the wall from the time the peel slipped, the scorch mark on the counter from the spilled tallow lamp, the dark smudge where your hand always rests when you lean to check the fire. This isn't just a place of work. It's a map of days that no longer exist, and yet they linger. You turn your attention to the fire, which now hums with steady heat, and prepare to shape the loaves. 4 rounds, 1 longer Pullman, 1 spiral. You slash the marks into each before they rise, something you never used to do. But now the marks matter. Now you want to know which loaf is which, even if no one else will. The morning passes without footsteps. No knock at the shutter, no muddy boots at the threshold. You wonder if the silence is yours or theirs. You don't mind either way. There's work to be done, even when there's no one to receive it. You bake the first batch, each loaf rising into itself with modest confidence. You pull them out with the old peel, its worn handle warm in your grip, and line them on the board, crusts crackling as they cool. You watch them for a while, as if waiting for one to speak. None do. You wrap the spiral loaf carefully, place it on the ledge near the window, and light the candle beside it. The button sits just behind, still there, still waiting. Midday brings a visitor, a quiet boy from the edge of the village, eyes downcast, palms open. He doesn't ask for anything. He just stands, and you hand him a heel without speaking. He takes it like an offering and leaves the same way he arrived. You wonder who sent him. You wonder if anyone did. You return to the bench, to the dough, to the rising that never ends. You shape a second batch, smaller this time, with fewer slashes. You hum as you need, not a tune, but a low, steady drone that rises from your chest and sits in the air like flour dust. The sound comforts you, not because of what it is, but because of what it replaces. By afternoon, the sky darkens, not into night, but into something close. Storms, maybe, or just clouds thick with the weight of almost rain. You light a second candle without realizing it. The bakery feels dim, not sad, just distant, like it's remembering something. You sit by the window and watch the lane. No one passes, no one knocks, but the air feels full, like a breath being held just behind the walls. You stand, stretch, and turn back to the oven, where the loaves are nearly done. You pull them out. One crust is too dark, one split unevenly, one is perfect. You cool them, wrap them, stack them. The spiral loaf remains untouched. The candle burns low beside it. Later, you clean without needing to. The counters are already wiped. The bins are full. The broom has no new dust to chase, but you sweep anyway, just to hear the sound, just to feel the motion. You stack the cloths in neat piles, reorganize the jars of salt and honey, and repair the string on the pantry latch. There's nothing wrong with it, but you fix it anyway. The act of mending feels necessary. It makes the silence easier to hold. When evening comes, the storm begins not with thunder, but with a soft pressure in the air, like the sky pressing down. The first drops hit the roof gently, then more. Then the rhythm begins steady, insistent, not violent, but unwavering. You sit by the oven, which is now dark but warm, and listen to the rain. You remember storms from your childhood, how they used to scare you, how your father would hum during them, saying that thunder was just the oven gods shouting at burnt crusts. You chuckle quietly at the thought. You hum the same tune now, letting it fill the room, letting it settle in the corners. The spiral loaf glows faintly in the candlelight, and the button beside it catches a glint like a blinking eye. You stay there long after the rain starts. The fire doesn't need tending. The loaves are done. The door's locked, but you don't move. You sit with your palms on your knees, your back against the cool stone wall, and your eyes half-lidded. You don't expect anything, but when the knock comes soft, barely there, almost not a knock at all, you don't startle. You don't rush. You just stand, slow and steady, and walk to the door. You open it into the rain. No one stands there, just a small cloth bundle, damp but intact, resting on the threshold. You bend and lift it. Inside a heel of bread, a smooth stone, and a folded strip of parchment with no writing, just a single pressed fingerprint, flower white, unmistakably human. You close the door quietly, set the bundle beside the crock, and sit again. You don't cry, you don't smile, you just sit. The bakery is quiet, but something in it has changed. The silence is no longer empty. The bread is still warm, the candle still burns, and the night, though wet and wind-battered, feels somehow less alone. When the morning comes, it brings fog so thick it turns the village into a pale sketch line, smudged, edges softened, everything wrapped in the hush of damp wool. You wake slowly, not startled or strained, but with a sense that something has already begun without you. The air is heavy with moisture, but warmer than it should be, the kind of warmth that seeps under the door, not quite welcome, not quite strange. You sit up, rub your face with both hands, and exhale the weight that sleep failed to dissolve. As your feet touch the floor, you feel a softness in the air that is not comfort. It's more like breath held too long. You light the candle with careful fingers, watching the flame catch and hold, and then you move to the oven. The coals are still faintly alive. You smile, just barely, and feed them without speaking. They stir, groan, and flare into motion like old bones stretching. You sit on your heels for a moment after the fire settles and rest your hands on your thighs. The silence in the bakery is thick, but not oppressive. It's the kind of silence that listens, the kind that waits. You rise and check the dough you left to prove overproofed again, slightly sunken in the center, but still usable. You knead it back into form slowly, deliberately, folding and pressing with a rhythm as familiar to you as your own heartbeat. As you work, you glance toward the ledge where the spiral loaf sat yesterday. It's gone. The cloth, too. The candle burned itself out overnight. Its wax pooled onto the sill in the shape of something vaguely familiar, almost like a path, or a river, or a question. The button and the smooth stone remain, side by side beside the crock, silent but unchanged. You don't touch them. You just look, then return to your dough. The fire behind you pops once, loud and sudden, like punctuation. You nod to yourself and keep kneading. You shape the loaves for the day with quieter hands. No special marks today, no spirals, no lines, just clean rounds with single slashes, simple, honest. As they rest, you mix a second batch, smaller, sweeter, with the last of the honey from the rival baker's gift. You don't expect anyone to ask for them, but they'll be there, just in case. You remember how the boy once called sweet loaves stories, said they tasted like things that hadn't happened yet. You didn't understand then. You do now. You shape them into soft rounds, place them in the small pan, and let them rise without a cloth. Let them breathe openly. By the time the oven reaches full heat, the fog outside has thickened into something near visible. You can see it creeping at the corners of the window, pressing against the glass like a soft hand. The village has gone silent. No footsteps, no carts, no dogs, just the sound of your own breath and the occasional sigh of the fire. You load the first batch of loaves into the oven and stand back, leaning on the old peel like a cane. The warmth from the fire wraps around you, making your eyes sting. You blink once, then again, and return to the bench. As the loaves bake, you make tea boiling water over the coals, letting the herbs steep longer than usual, until the scent fills the room with a bitterness that almost tastes like memory. You sip it in silence, then sip again, watching steam rise from the mug like a ghost, trying to tell you something too subtle to hear. When the bread is ready, you pull it from the oven, set it on the board, and do not mark them. You leave them plain. They steam quietly. They cool like sleeping animals. You brush them gently with cloth, then turn to the sweet batch. The honey loaves rise in the corner, smaller than expected, softer, trembling at the edges. You handle them delicately, shaping them again before the final proof, whispering to them in the way your mother once whispered to scared animals nonsense words, just tone and breath and kindness. The bakery smells different now, not just flour and ash, but something rounder, richer. It smells like waiting. A knock comes, sharp, clear, but brief. You open the shutter to see a boy not yours, not familiar, but young, with eyes too serious and hands clasped around a bundle. He says nothing, just holds it out. You take it gently. Inside a crust of old bread, worn down from travel, and a folded piece of parchment with a spiral drawn in charcoal. Nothing else. No message. Just the mark. You nod. He nods back, then leaves. You close the shutter softly and sit down. You place the spiral drawing beside the button and the stone. You don't know what it means, but you know it matters. The fog persists through afternoon. Customers come slowly, speaking little, touching the loaves like they're testing dreams. One woman cries when you hand her around. She doesn't explain. You don't ask. A man brings a basket of kindling in trade and thanks you without meeting your eyes. You nod. The honey loaves go last one by one, to those who don't ask, don't expect, but accept with reverence. You give them freely, not because they're extra, but because they're not. By sundown, the shelves are bare, the cloths folded, and the fire burned low. The fog lifts just enough to reveal the village again, still blurred, still quiet, but whole. You don't light a candle tonight. You let the darkness come as it chooses. You sit on your bench with the button in your palm, The spiral page in your lap, the stone warm from your hand. You don't try to arrange them, you just hold them. The bakery is still warm. The air still smells like something lived in and cared for. You rest your back against the wall and let your eyes close, not from fatigue, but from fullness. You think of the boy's humming, the way he always hit the wrong note on the third line. You hum it again now, wrong note and all. The sound slips into the stone, into the flour, into the air. You let it stay. Before sleep, you rise one last time and open the door. The fog has thinned, the stars have returned, and in the distance, far beyond the edge of the village, a single light flickers. It might be a lantern, it might be nothing, but you nod to it anyway. Then you return inside, lock the door, and leave the spiral drawing on the ledge where the bread used to be. Let it rise on its own. Let it be found. The next morning arrives quietly, without shift or warning, like a held breath finally released. No wind, no rain, no fog, just stillness, the kind that feels like an open hand waiting. You rise with less hesitation than usual, your body moving before your thoughts fully catch up. The floor is cold, but not biting. The air has changed, too lighter, crisper, cleaner. You light the candle without effort, the flame rising without a flicker, steady and sure. You kneel at the hearth, check the coals, and find them cold and black. You start the fire anew, stacking the wood with care, coaxing the flame back from silence. It comes easily, almost obedient, as you sit back on your heels and watch it grow. You feel the warmth spread through your chest, not just from the fire, but from something deeper. There is no clear reason for this feeling, but it clings to you like a scent remembered before a name. You breathe in the smoke and wood and wait for the oven to speak again. The dough comes together without protest. You mix the sponge with the last of the good flour, the grind even and clean, the texture light but firm beneath your palms. You knead slowly, deliberately, pressing not just to shape, but to remember. Your hands move without needing permission, folding the dough over and over like turning pages in a story you know by heart. You shape 5 loaves, 4 marked with a single line, 1 with a spiral, always the spiral. You think about not making it. Then your hand does it anyway. You cover them, set them to rise, and move to the shelves. The button, the stone, and the drawing remain where you left them. You brush a bit of flour dust away from the edge of the ledge and let your fingers rest beside them. They feel less like artifacts today and more like anchors. You don't need to touch them to feel their weight, but you do anyway, briefly, just to remind yourself they're real. You tend the oven next, raking the coals, feeding it slowly. The fire hums instead of hisses, and you think, maybe this is how the oven says thank you. You sit beside it and watch the light crawl across the stones, reflecting on the pale glaze of the broken crock. The crack gleams like a scar that no longer hurts. You reach for a cloth to wipe down the workbench and find a folded scrap tucked behind the salt jar, an old one, browned at the edges. You don't remember placing it there. It's blank, but folded with care, twice lengthwise, once across. You unfold it slowly, waiting for words to appear. Nothing, just faint creases, but still. You smooth it and place it with the others beside the spiral, beside the button, beside the stone. The loaves are ready to bake. You slide them into the oven. The spiral last. As they rise, the scent begins to fill the bakery warm, sweet, steady. It wraps around the beams, settles into the stone, clings to the corners like steam. You let it take over. You lean against the bench and sip water, then cider, then nothing. Just letting your mouth hold the taste of the air. You pull the loaves just before they brown too far. The spiral loaf splits perfectly this time, the mark opening like a slow smile. You line them on the board, letting the crust crackle softly as they cool. There is no rush to wrap them. You just sit and listen to the sound of bread becoming. Around mid-morning, the shutters rattle not from wind, but from a knock. You open them to find a child, small, bundled, unfamiliar. She says nothing, just holds out her hands. You give her the smallest round. She nods. Then she says, "He's not far now," and walks away before you can ask what that means. You close the shutter slower than usual, hold the ledge a little longer. You look back at the spiral loaf. You don't wrap it this time. You let it sit, cooling in the open air, like something waiting to be claimed. More people come than expected. A woman with a limp and a missing glove. A man who says nothing but leaves a bundle of rosemary on your bench. A pair of sisters who argue over which of your loaves is softer. You smile more than usual, not outwardly, but somewhere deep behind the stillness in your eyes. You pass bread, take payment, share silence. And when a merchant asks why you mark some loaves and not others, you answer, so they can find their way back, and leave it at that. He laughs, a little confused, but not unkind. As the sun climbs higher, the warmth in the bakery becomes soft, not stifling. The fire dims by design, the oven resting. You wash the tools slowly, each scrape of the basin, each rinse of the trough, done without rush. The door creaks. You expect another customer. It's the rival baker. Again, he holds no parcel this time, no bread, no honey. Just a stick of chalk and a roll of parchment under his arm. "Thought you might want something to write with?" he says. For when there's no one to tell it to, he places them on the bench, looks at the spiral loaf, then at you. He's coming back, isn't he? You don't answer. He nods anyway and leaves. You stand there for a while, hand on the bench, eyes on the parchment. You unwrap it, spread it flat. It's rough, handmade, imperfect, like your bread, like your hands. You don't write on it. Not yet, but you know you will. Later, when the words come. Afternoon falls slowly. The light from the window cuts long, soft angles across the stone floor. You sweep, not because it's needed, but because it's time. Then you set the spiral loaf back on the ledge, unwrapped. No candle, just the loaf, the drawing, the button, the stone, and now the folded blank page, a small altar to silence, a shrine to the boy, or to the waiting. You don't name it. You just sit across from it on the bench and rest your hands in your lap. You hum again, only for a moment. Then you hear it, the gate down the lane, a footstep, then another, then stillness. The door creaks open, slowly. You don't rise. You just turn your head, and there he is. Taller, paler, eyes older, clothes rough, sleeves too short, a pack on his shoulder, a crust in his hand. He doesn't speak. Neither do you. He walks in, one step at a time, until he stands beside the loaf. He picks it up, breaks it in two, offers you half. You take it. No questions, no stories, just warmth, just bread. And for the first time in what feels like years, the bakery is not quiet. It is full. That night, sleep comes differently. Not the usual collapse, not the usual ache-laden drift into half-darkness, but something gentler. You lie on your cot, the edge of the blanket tucked under your chin, and feel the rhythm of breath in a space no longer yours alone. On the other side of the room, the boy no longer a boy, not really sleeps on a folded cloth and a sack of flour, like he used to. His legs are longer now, his shoulders sharper, his jaw set in quiet defiance even in sleep. But the rest, the twitch of his hands, the way he mutters nonsense into the wool, the way his feet never quite stay covered by the blanket unchanged. You watch him from the dim safety of your cot, eyes half closed, the candle at the end of its wick casting a soft oval of light that flickers with every breath either of you takes. You don't know why he's come back. You haven't asked. He hasn't said. But he's here. That's all that matters. And in the bakery, with its worn stones and its watching silence, that's enough to remake the day. You wake before him, of course. The oven still needs tending. The dough still needs shaping. And the rhythm of fire and flour doesn't pause just because someone you thought lost has returned. You move quietly through the morning, relighting the fire, sifting flour, checking the sponge you mixed the night before. It's ready. You press your fingers into its soft dome and feel the slight give, the warmth of fermentation. You knead slowly, letting the dough stretch and resist under your palms. And as you do, you realize your hands feel different, less heavy, more certain, like they're being watched again. And they are. You glance up to see him, half wrapped in the blanket, hair askew, eyes still blinking away the night. He doesn't say anything, just nods. Then he pulls himself up, stretches, and moves to wash his face at the barrel near the door, like he never left, like no time passed. You say nothing. Words would make it too real. He helps with the shaping, clumsy at first, his fingers fumbling the folds of dough, too much pressure in the wrong places. You correct him once, with a touch on the wrist, and after that he remembers. You let him shape one of the spiral loaves. He hesitates before marking it, the dull tip of the knife hovering over the surface. Then he slashes it, clean, perfect curve, perfect depth. He glances at you, not for approval, but recognition. You nod. You let that be the praise. He doesn't need more. The fire is ready when the loaves are. You rake the coals evenly, slide the peel beneath the shaped rounds, and load the oven with practiced grace. The boy, young man, now watches closely, as if relearning the language of heat and wood. You say the temperature's right when the stone hisses softly but doesn't spit. He says he remembers. You doubt it, but don't correct him. Memory is its own kind of truth. As the loaves bake, you both sit on the bench near the fire. He drinks cider slowly, holding the mug with both hands like he used to when he was smaller, when the weight of it was almost too much. He doesn't ask about the crock, still cracked and resting near the hearth. He doesn't ask about the button, the stone, or the folded paper on the shelf, but his eyes land on each of them. You see it, you don't explain. Some things are better left as quiet markers in a place that remembers better than you do. The bread is perfect today. The crust split beautifully, the steam rising in quiet sighs, the scent richer than usual, as if the oven itself knows this is not just another morning. You line the loaves on the board, wrap 3 for delivery, leave the spiral one open on the counter. He tears off a piece, chews thoughtfully. It tastes less alone, he says. You pause, halfway through wiping the bench. Then you nod. So do you. You reply. He smiles. Just a little. Then finishes the rest of the slice in silence. The day unfolds with a kind of unfamiliar ease. Customers return familiar faces, cautious words. The baker's rival stops by, this time with no gifts. Just a nod and a glance at your assistant. The boy doesn't flinch, doesn't greet him. Just keeps slicing a fresh round, dusting the edge with flour like he's always done it. You catch the rival's slight smirk before he leaves. It feels like a closing of something, though not unfriendly. Just finished. By midday, the bakery hums with life. The boy fetches water, stirs sponge, checks temperatures. You let him. You don't correct. His hands remember more than his mouth admits. And the rhythm, the sacred rhythm of rising and resting. Heat and cooling returns like breath after a long pause. You realize then that you had kept working all these months not because you believed he'd return, but because the rhythm didn't give you another option. It was either need or collapse. Bake or forget. Feed the fire or freeze. That afternoon, when the customers fade and the shutters are drawn, you sit together on the bench and share a crust with cheese and a pot of stew left by the brewer's wife. You eat slowly, not out of hunger, but ritual. He talks, finally, not about where he went, not about why, just words, about the river, the stones, a dog he met, a song he forgot the ending to. You listen without asking for more. The story is not in the details. It's in the fact that he is here to speak them. Later, he finds the spiral drawing on the ledge, folds it once more, and tucks it into his pocket without a word. You don't stop him. He picks up the button too, rolls it between his fingers, then sets it gently in the flour jar. It disappears beneath the dust. A new place for it. A new meaning. The stone. He doesn't touch, but he looks at it for a long time before turning back to the oven. When night comes, you both stoke the coals together, sweeping the ash into neat piles, stacking the wood for tomorrow. He finds the missing slat on the back of the shelf and fixes it without being asked. You say, "You remembered," and he just shrugs. The stars are out when you unlatch the shutter. The moon sits low, fat and warm, like a loaf too eager to rise. You light a single candle, not as a sign, not as a call, but just because the bakery looks better with it. He watches the flame. You watch him. Neither of you speaks. The silence is different now, no longer expectant, just whole. Before sleep, you each shape one loaf for the morning. His is rough, slash deep, bold. Yours is smooth, slash gently, even. You let them sit side by side beneath the cloth. You don't say it out loud, but you know tomorrow you'll bake them together, and no one, not the priest, not the merchant, not the wind, will know which belong to whom. When you lie down that night, you do so with the certainty that the fire will still be warm in the morning, that the dough will rise, even if a little unevenly, that the oven will groan, the crust will crack, and the air will carry the scent of something made not from hope, but from hands. You let your eyes close. You hear his breathing from across the room, steady and slow. For the first time in many, many mornings, you do not wake before dawn. When you do wake, it's to the sound of movement, not loud, not rushed, but present. Someone already stoking the fire? You open your eyes slowly, blinking against the soft gray morning light that's found its way through the crack in the shutter. You smell smoke, clean smoke, not heavy, just the whisper of it curling through air that hasn't yet filled with flour. For a brief moment, you think it's a memory, some echo from months ago, when you still half dreamed of his return. But it's not. The sound is real. So is the scrape of wood against brick, the low creak of the oven door, and the faint grunt of someone crouching just a bit too long. You push the blanket aside and swing your feet down to the cold stone floor. It doesn't bite today. You rise, stretch, feel your spine settle into place with a familiar set of quiet clicks. You move toward the fire and pause in the doorway. He's already got it burning. Not perfectly. It's a little too much flame, not enough coal, but it's alive. He doesn't notice you right away. He's focused, sleeves rolled, eyes narrowed the way yours do when the fire's being stubborn. You watch for a while, not hiding, just letting the moment breathe. Eventually, he looks over his shoulder, nods once, and says, "It's almost ready." You nod back. That's all. You walk past him to the workbench and run your palm across its surface, dusting off the flour with a kind of reverence. There's no need for words. The rhythm has already begun. You step into it without resistance. The sponge from last night has risen with a soft dome, like a sleeping animal curled in cloth. You press a finger into it, feel the spring, and smile. You mix the flour in slowly, letting your hands learn the new texture. It's different today. Something about the weather. Maybe, or maybe it's you. The dough resists slightly, then yields, then leans into your palms like it remembers you. He stands beside you now, watching. You offer him the bowl. He takes it. His hands work differently than yours, less sure, more strength than finesse. But the shape is there. You show him emotion. He mimics it. You nod. He does it again. And this time, it's right. The dough listens. The room feels warmer than it should. The fire behind you crackles in agreement. You shape 6 loaves together, not for orders, not for trade, just to fill the shelf. 3 marked with lines, 1 with a spiral, 2 left plain. He asks nothing about the marks, doesn't even hesitate, just slashes his own. One of them looks like a fish, the other like a wave. You say nothing, but your mouth twitches. He sees. He smirks. Barely. That's enough. You line the loaves in their baskets, cover them, and return to the hearth to wait. He fetches water without asking. You find yourself humming not the tune from before, but something slower, older, wordless. He joins in after a moment, off-key, still. When the oven is ready, you load the loaves one by one. The stone breathes heat back at you like a living thing. You slide the last one, the spiral, into place and shut the door gently. The silence after the door closes feels thick, like the last page of a book just before you turn it back to the cover. You sit. He sits. The bench holds you both, creaking only once. You lean back. He leans forward. The candle flickers on the shelf behind you. The button, the drawing, the stone, they're still there. Still untouched, but they seem lighter now, like they've been given what they were waiting for. When the bread is ready, the scent is different. Deeper, richer. There's something in it that makes the skin on your arms prickle. Not a warning, more like recognition. You open the oven. The crusts are perfect. The marks held their shape. The spiral opened into something that looks like a path drawn in ash. You line them on the board. He touches each one, softly, like reading with his fingertips. You hand him the peel. He doesn't refuse. You sit while he sweeps the floor, checks the fire, folds the cloths. When he finishes, he sits again, wiping his hands on the edge of his sleeve. He turns to you. Quietly, he says, "Are you still afraid?" You blink once. Then you say, "Only when the dough is too quiet." He nods, says nothing else. Later, he prepares a small parcel, 2 loaves wrapped in linen, a wedge of cheese, a few dried herbs tucked in like a blessing. He ties it with care. You watch, but don't ask. He says he's going to the hill beyond the village, just for a walk. You nod. He stands at the door for a moment, hand on the frame, not looking back. Then he says, "Do you need anything?" You shake your head. "Just bring the cloth back." He smiles. "Always." And then he's gone. Out into the pale morning, feet sure on the path. You sit at the bench again. Alone, but not hollow. You place the last loaf, the plain one, on the sill, not as a sign, just as a habit. You light no candle. You leave the shutter unlatched. You sweep the floor again, even though it's clean. You kneel at the hearth and bank the fire. The coals glow steady. You listen to them hum. You think about the first time you burned a loaf. The first time you split a crust just right. The first time you were left. The first time someone came back. All of it lives here now. In the stones. In the boards. In the warmth that never quite leaves even when the fire dies down. When night falls, you lie on your cot with your hands folded across your chest. The window is open. The stars blink slowly, like they're remembering how to stay still. You hear footsteps outside, not close, but near. You don't rise. You don't check. You just close your eyes and let the bakery breathe around you. And when the sleep comes, it carries no weight. Just warmth. Just the scent of bread. Just the sound of someone walking back.